could be found. But after much fierce fighting, it was clear that all hope was lost without great sacrifice. Lady Yolda took it upon herself to seal the replication complex with 7 other Iron Lords and herself inside, whilst also detonating an explosive device that contained the outbreak of Siva. The only Iron Lord to survive the replication complex was Lord Saladin, and the battle outside in the Cosmodrome had seen all the other Iron Lords slaughtered, with the exception of Lady Ephrodite, who went on a path of exile and pacifism from that day onward. The area of the Cosmodrome containing Siva was from this point onwards quarantined, and from that day forth the region would now be known as the Plague Lands for the mechanical plague that lay dormant beneath its surface. Lord Saladin would wait and watch, holding silent vigil over the place, until the day that he might finally be needed again, to finally bring rest to those Iron Lords that had been lost. Meanwhile, back in the city, trouble was starting to brew. Osiris, the new Warlock Vanguard, was descending into a deep and secluded study of the Vex. He knew that other threats to the city, such as the Fallen, did exist, but his research had left him convinced that the Vex represented the greatest present danger to the forces of the city and to the Guardian Orders. These beliefs brought him into contention with the rest of the consensus, and in particular, the Speaker. When Osiris sought to publish his findings in order to arm the people of the city with knowledge, the people instead took to them not as scientific study or fact, or even merely as speculation by a scholar. Instead, they took to them as prophecy. Such was the cult of Osiris's personality. The Speaker then saw this as an attempt to radicalize and split the population of the city between those that supported Osiris and those that supported the consensus. The Speaker even took to the extreme measure of burning the prophecies of Osiris, and began to speak of the once revered Warlock as though he was a curse. One day, the Speaker called the consensus to order and declared that Osiris was a tumor to an otherwise healthy body, and called for a motion to exile the Warlock. It was at this moment, however, that Osiris entered the hall of the consensus and accepted the decision wholeheartedly. Osiris left the city and headed out into the territories of the Vex so he could fight them on their own ground. But what Osiris could not take with him was the impact that he'd made upon the city and its people. This was irreversible, and would sow the first seeds of dissent against the Vanguard, the city and the consensus. Seeds that perhaps can still be felt to this day, seeds that perhaps have dwindled and died, but regardless, Osiris's cult would leave a mark. There was, however, little time for this disunity amongst the people and the guardians of the city. A foe on the horizon that was all too familiar was beginning to raise its ugly head, and all of the forces of the city would need to muster in order to face it. The fallen houses were starting to coordinate and gather their forces. Whilst this would sound innocuous to some, this would be correctly identified by the Hunter Scouts in the employ of the Vanguard as all too terrible an occurrence. The fallen houses were normally fiercely territorial and would fight amongst themselves to maintain the status quo, but for them all to be collaborating meant that they needed to unite under a common cause, and this could only be one thing: the Great Machine. Having seen the House of Devils so firmly rebuked by the city at the Battle of the Six Fronts, it was clear to the Fallen that it would take the forces of more than just a single house to have any chance of breaking the city and claiming the Great Machine for their own. And so the 4 greatest houses in the system came together with a united purpose: to reclaim their heritage lost in the whirlwind by right of war. The House of Devils, Kings, Winter, and Wolves collected their forces and made plans to converge on the city as a united armada that would blot out the stars with their numbers. Millions of Fallen were assembled for what was quite possibly the most colossal battle in the history of the city. It was believed that with their combined might, the houses would be unstoppable, and that united under a joint banner they would not only reclaim the Great Machine, but also destroy their bitter human rivals once and for all. The battle for the city that would take place that day would be known as the Battle of the Twilight Gap. The city prepared for the attack, and the defense was organized by 3 titans. Lord Saladin led the defenses and was in command of all deployments of the forces of the city. His 2 commanders would be given specific forces and would be able to assist in holding the wall from the front line. The fighting was ferocious, and it appeared as though the Fallen had humanity backed into a corner as the forces of the Devils, Winter, and Kings pushed hard against the Twilight Gap, a small segment of fortifications that was being quickly overrun. Saladin saw this and was dismayed, calling for all forces to fall back to the next district. Lord Shaxx, who was at the Twilight Gap, saw this and could not abide by such a notion, for he knew that falling back could very well mean the doom of the city. He was left with a choice. He could either obey orders and fall back to the city, or he could hold his ground and defend the Twilight Gap with everything that he had left. In that moment, Shaxx held the fate of the last safe city and of all of humanity in his hands. And luckily for us, he chose to disobey his orders. He called his fire team, including the fabled gunslinger Anna Bray, the Sunbreaker weapons crafter known as Lui Feng, and 3 other guardians known as Keshi 32, Abdi, and Truce. Together the 6 of them fought, back to back, side by side, dying over and over, defending the very soil for the hallowed place that it was. For this was the last bastion of hope, and they would defend it until the last of their light was spent. The Firebreak Order would have been proud. They had stood their ground and chosen a place upon which it would be worthy for them to die. But they would not fall, and after enough time had passed, the other defenders were able to reorganize and create a counterattack. The reinforcements included Andal Brask, the Hunter Vanguard, and Commander Zavala, the other sub-commander of the city's forces. Now reunited with their fellow Guardians, they would begin to sweep back the tide of Fallen, and with that, any chance of the Fallen claiming the Traveler was snuffed out for good. Lord Shaxx, with his decisions in that split second, had saved the last safe city. This represented a landmark moment for the city. Not only was it truly a stellar victory for the forces of the city over the Fallen, but it set into motion a spirit of indomitable confidence within the Guardian Orders. The Fallen had gathered the full measure of their might to contest the city, and in spite of those close odds, the attack had been squarely repelled. Shaxx, however, would feel repercussions of this day. Him, Zavala, and Saladin would never quite be friends again, thanks to his insubordination on that day. Regardless, Shaxx would gain a level of prestige that was unparalleled, and would go down in the history of the city as a living legend. But the cost of this victory would also be immense. Many legendary Guardians had fallen that day, and the ranks of those that remained were stretched thin. Amongst those supposedly lost was Anna Bray, who had been seen by Zavala falling from the city after being assailed by a fallen captain. The city mourned for the losses, but in a way, it also made the city stronger, as the loss brought a series of actions from the city's citizens and guardians that proved its own resolve. Many attempts were made to honor the heroic guardians that had fallen that day, but the most notorious of these attempts was not some statue commissioned or a bank of flowers left in the tower. Instead, it was the creation of 2 genius inventors known as Faisal Crux and Victor Lomar of the Crux Lomar Foundries. They were responsible for creating much of the city's heavy ordnance, and with this goal of honoring the guardians that had fallen that day in mind, there was a pure intent that they had realized, and they saw to the development of a new weapon through what would be known as Project Heimdall. This would involve the melting down of the armor of those guardians lost at the Battle of Twilight Gap. They would then see that armor reforged into one of the most infamous weapons in the history of humanity, the Yalahorn shoulder-mounted launcher system. Not only did it contain revolutionary technology in the form of the Wolfpack rounds, but it also howled with the fury of the Guardians that had fallen that day, fighting back not just with the explosive fire that one would expect, but also with the light of those Guardians that had fallen. Others still honored those that had fallen that day with actions that were more direct. Saint 14 was the most notorious amongst them, and took it upon himself to personally conduct the Great Crusades. These were great attacks against the fallen that he undertook alone. These campaigns were incredibly successful, and as time went on, each of the houses were beaten back. Eventually, the Crusades were so successful that Saint 14 found himself dueling with Sulcus, the Kell of the House of Devils. Sulcus eventually held the Titan in a choking grip, and it was almost at the point where Saint was defeated. But the Titan rolled back his shoulders and head, with every ounce of strength remaining, and used it to headbutt the Kell of the fallen House of Devils so hard that the Kell's skull caved in, killing him instantly. Saint 14 stood, alive and victorious. Saint was then contacted by the Speaker, and although the Speaker wished him to return home, having heard news of Osiris being spotted on Mercury, Saint headed out there to find him, and was never seen again. However, what is overlooked by some is that the glorious victory at Twilight Gap would have been impossible without the intervention of another infamous figure within the system, namely, the Awoken Queen of the Reef, Mara Sov. She saw the Fallen communicating with each other across the system, and it was the House of Wolves that had disturbed her. Their fleet had gathered from the Jovian moons and was making a resupply run at the asteroid of Ceres, which lay squarely in Awoken territory. The Queen had two possible choices. Either she could allow the Fallen to pass by and keep the reef a secret from the rest of the system, or she could engage the Fallen Wolves at her door and destroy them, whilst exposing the reef to everyone in Sol. A choice between secrecy and publicity, a choice between peace and war, and Mara chose war. What followed was a series of campaigns and skirmishes that involved both the Awoken of the Reef and the various fractious parts of the House of Wolves. It would culminate in a battle between Mara's forces and the newly appointed Wolf-Kell Skolas the Rabbit. The war might have been yet bloodier and might even have been lost, but the Fallen were betrayed by a House of Judgment scribe known as Varix the Loyal. He was in service to Skolas and allowed the Awoken a critical advantage, which let them capture Skolas finally. He was sent to languish in the Prison of Elders, along with many of his truly faithful fallen wolves. But in the Prison of Elders, there was no potential to grow, and so some of the wolves swore loyalty to the Vestian dynasty of Mara Sov. They would eventually, of course, betray her, but for a time, the Fallen and the Awoken lived together in the reef in harmony. Meanwhile, in the ranks of the Guardians, Osiris's teachings would not go without having an impact still. Saint 14 was not the only one who was seemingly obsessed with the old Warlock Master, and having heard of the power of the Vex from his teachings, there were others that sought to fight against this terrible foe. And it was then that three Guardians, known as Pradith, Pahanin, and Kabir the Legionless, would attempt to enter the Vault of Glass and defeat the terrifying Vex presence within. However, they severely underestimated the power of the Vex's defenses within the vault, which, despite seeming like nothing more than a large cave network, was in fact a giant fortress and the site of some of their greatest experiments with time. Within the time streams, they could do more than simply destroy the Guardians with their immense firepower. They could manipulate time as a weapon. The Guardians faced what were known as the Oracles in the Vault, Vex supercomputers capable of isolating an individual within time, and unless they asserted dominance over it, removing them entirely. Understand that this means you don't simply die. To be found wanting by an oracle, to be stunned by the ritual of negation, is to have never existed at all. Such was the power of the Vex in the vault. In the face of such power, the Guardians were helpless. The hunter Pahanin fled, and the warlock Pradith was locked deep in the confines of the vault, lost in its time stream. However, it was Kabir the Legionless who would face the most gruesome fate of all. Kabir would drink of the radioloria of the Vex oracles, and this meant that his body slowly began to be corrupted as he himself was changed into the Vex. He would lose control over his body and brain, and before they took him entirely, Kabir forged a mighty shield known as the Aegis. It is into this shield that he poured all of his light, so that if other Guardians might come through the vault, they might have a source of power that could be used to break the Vex's hold over time. The first raid on the Vault of Glass was a failure, and Kabir the Legionless was no more. But this would not be the last adventure that the Guardians would see in the Vault of Glass. Meanwhile, in the city, factional differences within the Consensus were beginning to intensify, and Lysander, the leader of the faction known as the Concordat, declared war upon the Vanguard and the Speaker, although his reasons for doing so are not well recorded or understood. This upheaval led to a final confrontation between the New Monarchy and the Concordat in the tower that is known as Bannerfall, and this effectively ended their membership of the Consensus and their general part in the city's life. In their place, another faction known as the Future War Cult was promoted to the rank of full Consensus member. Around this time, the Consensus records also make the first real mention of Lord Shaxx and his Crucible, the objective of which was simply to allow Guardians to train by fighting each other. Guardians had long had a habit of fighting and settling differences through combat, but Shaxx's Crucible formalized the practice and acted as a tempering flame to the blade that was the young Guardians entering the ranks that had so recently been filled with heroes. The Crucible over time became more and more engraved in the city's culture, and eventually became a televised sport within the city, with residents placing bets and supporting their favored Guardians or clan-based teams with incredible vigor, just as one might support any other sporting team today. The games led to a sense of honor and chivalry for most, because even as the Guardians fought each other, they made each other stronger in the process. But that strength would still not be enough to stop the most aggressive of adversaries. It had been some time since the attack on Twilight Gap, and the Fallen had not made another assault on the city in some time. However, this was not to say that the Fallen weren't still a menace. Long prior to Twilight Gap, the wilds were haunted by the whispers of a fallen mercenary called Taniks the Scarred, who was a gun for hire amongst the Fallen, one who would pursue Guardian targets in particular at the behest of those who could pay a handsome price. A mercenary through and through, but a devious one with a mean streak and a habit for destroying Guardians entirely. After encountering him in the field, the hunter Andal Brask and his close friend Cade Six made what would be known as the Vanguard Dare. The first one to kill Taniks would be rewarded with renown and fame. The loser would fill the hunter's vanguard position, a most onerous task for a hunter that desires freedom and the ability to explore. Cade went on to win the contest, killing Taniks. But the problem was that Cade had not simply killed a being of mortal flesh. Taniks was more mechanical than biological, and every death would simply mean his reconstruction. In time, Taniks would find vengeance, and sometime after the Fallen had been served their bitter defeat at Twilight Gap, Taniks would serve vengeance by slaughtering Andal Brask. Feeling guilt and a responsibility for not having been able to kill Taniks, Cade took the place of the Hunter Vanguard in Andal's stead. The loss of the Hunter's Vanguard could have been a deterrent to the Consensus and the FOTC generally, but perhaps emboldened by the city's dominant position or believing with hubris that they could reclaim the glory of the Golden Age, they set their sights on a grand military goal. When the first men landed on the moon in the 20th century, they marked themselves as true pioneers of humanity and human civilization. For better or for worse, the consensus sought to emulate their forebears and sought to reclaim the moon from the Hive. Some would call it brave, the wise would call it madness. Lord Shax, having faced the Hive and the might of their swords before, would inform the consensus in no uncertain terms of the mistake that they were making, pleading with them to call off the attack after having witnessed their power at another smaller skirmish known as the Battle of the Burning Lake. The consensus, however, was unmoved, and the expeditionary army was approved. The city gathered together the first and last army of Guardians to serve on a mass offensive against the alien force in Sol. Over 1,000 Guardians journeyed to the moon and touched down with the intent to claim it from the Hive by force. However, in spite of the might of over 1,000 Guardians being present on the moon's surface, the banners of the Cormorant Seal would meet stern resistance from the Hive. Whilst gains were made at first, and whilst some prisoners were even captured, the Guardians were stopped by an unbreakable champion of the Hive, a terrible demon wreathed in green flame, wielding a sword that cracked the surface of the moon with every swing. It was here that the Battle of Mare Imbrium would be fiercest, and it was here that the Guardians would first face Crota, the Eater of Hope, the son of Oryx. His counter-assault on the Guardian forces was so vicious and complete that it is better remembered as butchery. The Guardian forces had to pull back, having lost many of their number, and so the Battle of Mare Imbrium ended in crushing defeat. As the beleaguered Guardian forces fled the moon's surface, they left behind many dead, and would forever remember the failed assault on the moon by a terrible different name. They would remember it as the Great Disaster. The aftermath of this calamitous event was far-reaching and tragic, but there is one tragedy that rises to prominence above all the others: the tragedy of Eriana III and Wei Ning. Eriana III was a warlock of the Praxic Order, and at Mare Imbrium she had lost her lover, Wei Ning, a mighty Titan warrior, who at the hands of Crota had been slain. Wishing for revenge, Eriana sought a means by which she could assail the Hive and destroy Crota, but she would not receive any assistance from the city following their terrible defeat, as the consensus suspended all cislunar Guardian operations and stated that any to step onto the moon's surface did so alone. Eriana's vengeance would have to be attained another way. She was joined in her struggle by a hunter of the Hidden, a mysterious organization run by Ikora Rey. This hunter was Eris Morn, and she too was hell-bent on avenging those who had fallen to Crota's blades on the surface of the moon. Together, they knew that in order to defeat their enemy, they needed to understand them, and if they expected any success in this matter, they needed to find someone who knew the Hive better than most. And so it was that they sought out the exiled warlock master of Hive Arcana. They sought out Toland, the Shattered One. His exile was originally due to his heretical beliefs, and his adoption of the Hive's very own sword logic as his core values. He believed that the darkness would be victorious with this simpler, more effective logic of battle. And with Toland at their side, a team began to form. Eris, Toland, and Eriana were joined by two hunters known as Omargar and Saimota, and a mighty titan of the Pilgrim Guard known as Veltalo. Together the fire team would assemble and assault the Hellmouth and take the fight to the Hive. 6 of them would go down into the pit, seeking revenge for those they'd lost, or seeking power locked deep within the Hive fortress. Veltalo was defeated by a mass of thralls that swarmed over him, and though the thrall were weak individually, as a horde, they tore the Titan limb from limb. Saimota was lost at the hands of Omnigul, the will of Crota, and the mother of his spawn. Eris was the last to see Omar Agar, who had been captured and broken by the Hive, suffering possibly a worse fate than death, for his light was torn from him like flesh from bone, and was fed to a new generation of Crota's spawn. He died in agony so unimaginable that only in the cruel minds of the Hive could it even be contemplated. Ariana III and Toland made it down into the stills at the very bottom of the Hellmouth, and even made it into Crota's Ascendant realm, the Oversoul throne. It was here, in the apex of Crota's power, that Toland showed his true colors. He conversed with the death singer Yurt, and his curiosity to understand her death song was met with a culling. He was stricken from his mortal body by her power, and his soul was loosed into the Ascendant realm, where he would wander the Sea of Screams, much to his delight, much to his interest. Then, it was only Ariana who stood before the power of the Hive Prince. Her death is not recorded, but it is assumed without a doubt that she perished. This left only one, Eris Morn. Eris, who was now deep in the Hellmouth, and who had lost her sight and her ghost. She should have died at the hands of the Hive, and yet she went on and survived, and stole back her sight using the eyes of an acolyte as her own, and for hundreds of years she dwelled in the depths of the Hellmouth. With the loss at Mara Ibrium and the failure of the first fire team to defeat Crota's forces, the city descended once again into an age where darkness seemed very palpable and very terrifying. The forces of the enemy pressed in around us, and the once great power that had radiated from the Guardians had started to wane. The city held its breath as the last tower stood in defiance against the night. Tales once told to frighten children slowly stopped, as the children were frightened anyway. And in the hour of great darkness that had descended upon us, something glimmered. It was not something that the city was unused to, but it was something that it had forgotten. Hope. Hope would find us. And that hope was you. It was now, in a time of great need, that we were risen into this world. But even as we took our first steps, we were in grave danger. After evading the Fallen, we found an old Arcadia jump ship, capable of taking us to the last safe city. Guided by our ghost, we made our way past mountains and through storms, and it was here that we were informed of the true mission of every Guardian: to push back the darkness and to assist each other and fight for the light. We would go and assist Guardians on Earth and beyond, but first, we needed to head back to the Cosmodrome to slay Rixis. Rixis was an Archon rising of the House of Devils, and from his remains we claimed a near-light speed drive, which allowed our old jump ship to head out further into the system and to travel to other worlds. It was then that we explored the abandoned Cosmodrome, and found not only that the Fallen were trying to break through the firewalls of a fragment of the Warmind Rasputin, a fragment of which was located in the Cosmodrome on Earth, but also it was when we discovered a Hive nesting ground. This nest had been built into the old Skywatch of Earth, and it was led by a witch who we killed. The ghost handily assumed and deduced that the witch had to have come from the moon. We also reactivated an old array station, unintentionally connecting the fragment of Rasputin to systems all across Sol. Finally, we took on the fallen devils in their home turf, defeating their High Servitor, Sepix Prime, and dealing a crippling blow to the house. For a fledgling Guardian, to accomplish such feats was not unheard of, but it would be wrong to state that we hadn't gained the attention of a few important individuals. Next, we decided to follow up on what we discovered in the Skywatch and ventured out to the moon to discover what was happening and how the Hive had made it to Earth. Here we discovered a Hive temple known as the Temple of Crota, and after defeating its dark wardens, we retrieved a captured ghost who had died but had learned of a Hive plan to invade Earth. Investigating this further led us to infiltrate the Hive fortress known as the Hellmouth, where we discovered a Hive information database known as the World's Grave. This contained all the knowledge imaginable on the Hive and their plans. The World's Grave indicated that the Hive had been preparing to unleash their forces on Earth for centuries, and that their plans were nearing fruition. It was our job then to blunt the Hive offensive in any manner we could, and from here we then ventured back into the Hive fortress for several sorties, the first of which allowed us to destroy the physical manifestation of the Hive champion Crota's sword, and venturing deeper into the inner recesses of the fortress allowed us to destroy a shrine to Oryx himself and defeat its guardian, Sardok. Finally, however, we received a desperate communication from the speaker, stating that they believed that the Hive were engaged in a ritual that was draining the Traveler of its light. We immediately rushed back to the Temple of Crota to infiltrate the fortress once again and stop the ritual. But it was here that we were greeted by a mysterious voice, the Exo Stranger. She told us that there were worse enemies than the Hive, and that we should go down and face them, and that if we survived, we should meet her in the Ishtar Sink on Venus. Having heard the words of the mysterious figure, we successfully stopped the ritual, which as it turns out was draining the light of the Traveler through the use of one of its own broken shards. But our job was not complete. Following the warning that there were worse foes than this out in the world, we headed to the Ishtar Sink on Venus and discovered, for the first time, the Vex. It is here, after slaying them en masse, that we discovered Elsie Bray, better known as the Exo Stranger. Elsie's identity would be a mystery to us for years to come, and it was only when we would rediscover her sister, Anna Bray, that we would ever get any note from Elsie in particular. But it was worth knowing that Elsie had our back, even if she didn't even have time to explain why she didn't have time to explain. She told us that in order to stop the Vex, and to stop a greater darkness, we needed to head to the Black Garden, where the Vex were born. We were informed that only after defeating the heart of the Black Garden would our Traveler begin to heal. The only ones who knew the location of the Black Garden were the Awoken, and so we headed out to the reef to meet them. They were at first very unwilling to work with us, and even greeted us with contempt, but Mara Sov sought an agreement with us, and so Prince Aldrin informed us that we would be allowed to enter the Black Garden only if a key was forged, and in order to do that, the Awoken would need the head of a Vex Gate Lord, and so we would need to head back to Venus to track one down. In order to do this, we would need to know more about the Vex as a whole, and so we ambushed a Cyclops and stole its mind core, then taking it to a nearby abandoned Ishtar Collective facility to study it. From here we discovered the true nature of the Vex and realized they were capable of traveling through time, and that they could organize and coordinate their attacks across many different timelines within seconds. Following this, we also worked to secure Venus better against the Fallen that had infested it, and it was at this moment that an Ishtar Collective laboratory was being broken into by the House of Winter. The Cryptarch, Master Rahul, convinced us to enter and to defend this place, so that the secrets within could not be stolen by the Vex. It was also here that we learned of the Vault of Glass for the first time. Tracing back the fallen intruders, we discovered a ketch belonging to the House of Winter, and boarded it, killing not only many members of its crew, but also its leader, the Kell of the House of Winter. Finally, we went to the Infinite Steps and besieged the Gate Lord Zydron, taking its head and bringing it back to the Awoken Queen. Prince Aldrin then extracted the eye of the Gate Lord, allowing us to impersonate it and enter the Black Garden. However, the eye itself needed to be charged, and so we were told the location of the Black Garden and sent upon our way. We took the eye with us, knowing that this was our only chance of getting inside. We eventually found the gate to the Black Garden within Meridian Bay's greater region known as the Valley of the Kings. The gate was massive and ominous, and even pulsed with some kind of strange power, but we could not access it immediately. This time, we would need to find more about what was going on, and so we investigated Mars. First, we looked more into the Vex, and realized that they were returning home here, and that the Black Garden and Mars were in fact the origin of the Vex. And we also investigated the Dust Palace, a place where the Cabal had been invading and were attempting to co-opt a Warmind system. It was there that we checked the subsystem in question and found that it was occupied by none other than the fragment of Rasputin that we had earlier been facing on Earth. Finally, we discovered a way of charging the Gate Lord's eye and defeating the Primus of the Blind Legion in our quest to utilize a Vex Spire to accomplish this. The Vex Spire was within the heart of Cabal territory, and so we had to raid a heavily armed and defended base, but we were successful nonetheless, and now was our chance to assault the Black Garden for good. As we made our assault, we made our way through copious numbers of Vex frames that were clearly ancient, and as we entered the Black Garden, these ancient frames were covered in moss. Such was the way of the Black Garden. It was a place where life flourished. But something dark had infected the heart of this place, and had infected the Vex as well. Not being able to comprehend it, the Vex had taken to worshipping it. This primordial thing that we faced in the heart of the Black Garden was not well understood, but it is best believed to be some festering remnant of the darkness that was dimming the light of the Traveler. It was an imposter, an assailant, a villain, and we needed to destroy it. And so we did. It started to slave Vex minds to its will, and it began to awaken mighty Vex champions. But in doing so, it bound itself to these physical forms, and as we defeated each one of them, the heart of the Black Garden began to die. When finally it was destroyed, light returned to the system and the Traveler, and the speaker began to call us home. We sat in the tower for but another small moment, and received a mysterious token from the stranger who appeared spontaneously. The token was her rifle, and with that, she told us that there were many other terrible, dark things out in the system. And so, we moved on. But our first few adventures were not just yet completed. There was one more that we would see to. The vengeance of Kabir, Pahanin, and Pradith. The Vault of Glass had lain dormant since that fire team raided its inner depths and was repelled. But it was now our fate to take on this challenge. We descended into darkness with 5 other Guardians, and using the Aegis left behind by Kabir, we defeated the Templar and its oracles, made our way through the Gorgon's labyrinth, and descended into the heart of the vault, finally discovering the glass throne. It was at the heart of this place that we encountered the true power of the Hazen Lords. That power was Atheon, Time's conflux, a Vex frame capable of manipulating the threads of time itself, sending both its minions and us backwards and forwards in time. But with the light, we had learned to wield and express our might, and it showed us clearly one thing. Even though Atheon commanded the threads of fate itself, we were Guardians, and we were above such petty causality. For Guardians sampled the truth of paracausality. The power of the light and dark applied to us as well, and we were able to manipulate the fabric of the universe with our very will. Guardians would not have their fate made for them. Guardians would make their own fate. And so Atheon was defeated, and the Vault of Glass was sundered. At long last, the fire team that had entered so long ago could all be put to rest. But this was only our first adventure. and there were many more on the horizons. The first of which would set off a chain of events that would culminate not only in our strengthening and the renewal of yet more light, but it would result in the death of gods and kings. In our short time as Guardians, we had already accomplished what some believed to be impossible. But our duty as Guardians had only just begun. It was hardly a few months into our new lives when the first of the many crises that would come our way would rear its ugly head. That challenge was the rising Hive invasion on the moon that would now be spurred into action by its new ascendant champion, the Hive Prince Crota. His horde would rise to start their incursion on Earth, and the invasion would be one of terrible consequences were it not for a single lost soul that returned to us, Eris Morn, the last. She had been lost within the Hellmouth for so long, but with the impending danger of Crota's invasion, she managed to escape and made her way back to the tower where she would be able to warn us of the coming invasion. Though Zavala and the Speaker saw her new eyes torn from an acolyte to be a sign of corruption, Ikora Rey, the hidden leader, was pleased to see her agent return alive, and rightly trusted her to remain loyal to the tower in this time of great need. Eris would then direct us in a series of skirmishes and tactical strikes to defeat the invading forces of Crota, and to stop the invasion before it could get worse. First, we were directed to attack Sardon, the Fist of Crota, the commander of his armies on Earth. After breaking him and leaving him ruined within the caverns below the Cosmodrome, we then decided to interfere with an attack on the systems of Rasputin that would lead us into a new place known as the Seraphim Vault. If Omnigul and her forces were able to control the Warmind, or even merely disable it, then the victory of the Hive would be almost assured. The battle for the Warmind was brief, and there was a moment at which the might of Crota was summoned into the fray. Omnigul directing this massive ogre's rage in our direction was of no use, however, and the Hive were yet again struck down. And here, there was an opening for a perfect counterattack. Crota's soul was in the process of being summoned forth from the Ascendant Realm so that he could once again lead the armies of the Hive. Now was our opportunity to expel him back into the Sea of Screams, and to deny his assault entirely. We headed deep into the Hellmouth, into one of the darkest chambers, and discovered his lair, and defeated him in our mortal realm. Our task was not yet finished though. Crota would still be able to reach out into our realm with the many appendages of power that he held under his control, the other various Hive that languished throughout Earth. Our next task was to sever these servants from our world and to destroy Crota's power in our domain. The greatest of these servants would not be his eyes or his hand or his heart, it would be his will. Omnigul, the mother of his spawn, a Hive witch of terrible power. But even she was not powerful enough to stop us. And now, with Crota's power dwindling in the material realm, our war against him could have been considered at least somewhat over. However, there was no guarantee that the minions of Crota, as well as Crota himself, would not simply rise and return in another time. They were a disease festering in the heart of the moon, and we needed to be the fever that would burn them out. But beyond just this, there was not merely the safety of the city to consider. Eris asked us to do one last thing for her, and she asked us to do it so that she might finally see vengeance for her friends and her fire team. So we set out on a journey to raid the depths of the Hellmouth as they once had, and to defeat Crota once and for all. 6 of us went down into the pit, traveling to one of the darkest places in all our worlds, the Stills. The darkness here was complete and oppressed our light at every turn, slowing us so that we might be dragged into the swarm of Hive thrall that awaited us. We fought through the darkness, with enemies surrounding us at every interval until we finally arrived at the keyhole, a gateway from our reality into the Ascendant Plane. We held the bridge, opened the way, and stepped through. On the other side, we were greeted by darkness and a sky of green fire. We had taken our first steps into the Ascendant Realm, and we now stood within Crota's own sword world, the Oversoul Throne. It was crucial that we killed Crota here and nowhere else, for to truly kill an Ascendant Hive, you must kill them within their throne realm. Any other death would not be true, and would simply leave them regenerating here in time. No, here we had to slay him, and in this place we needed to use the logic of the sword in order to slaughter him. We proved our competence not only by crossing one side of his Ascendant realm via the use of a bridge, most literally demonstrating our use of the sword logic, but also by slaying Yut, the Death Singer. We then summoned the Hive Champion to combat, and faced our very first god. It is crucial here to remember something Toland once said on the nature of Hive swords. He said that any other weapon of the Hive, such as a boomer or a shredder, only kills acyclically, that they send out harm and take nothing back. When the boomer's fire is all but gone, it is nothing, and when the shredder's ammunition has been discharged, it is no more than axion and neutrino scatter. But the sword goes on. The sword is like a bridge. It binds wielder to victim. It binds life to death. And when the binding is done, the sword remembers, and would be hungrier and sharper for it. This is the logic that rules the Hive, the logic of the sword, where the ultimate shape of the universe would be one made sharp over eons of slaughter. It was once Toland's sage advice to Eris that should they seek power in their quest at any point to conquer the Hive in their own throne world, it would be best to remember that the ultimate arbiter in the realms of the Hive would be that of a sword made sharp with the blood of the conquered, blood that had been spilled over millennia. And so, we used these weapons. We slew Crota's sword-bearers in their own realm and claimed their blades, giving us access to a weapon that could destroy a god. And so, with our light, we stunned the god Prince, and with the weapons of the Hive, with his own sword, we sundered him from existence. At long last, Eris's fire team would know some form of peace, and Waning's death, as well as Ariana's, had been avenged. But woe to those that believed our struggle to be over, for at the moment of his death, Crota cried out across the night, and soon the night would answer. Whilst Earth was still reeling from the Hive invasion, the death of the Hive Prince Crota would not go unnoticed by the other occupants of Sol. And so it happened that the Queen of the Reef would have use of such a talented guardian. The disgraced former Kell of the House of Wolves, Skolas the Rabbit, was released by the Nine, for reasons unknown. The Nine are a strange and shadowy organization, found to be dark matter made manifest, but their intentions have always been alien to us. It is unclear why Skolas was released by them, but perhaps in time we will discover. They also gifted him with a catch, allowing him to effectively begin to reassemble his old house. Mara's usurpation of the fallen wolves had always been an interesting question of loyalty for those that swore allegiance to her, and the fallen that had joined her had now betrayed her, rejoining their old Kell Skolas. The wolves would make an unsuccessful attempt on Mara's life, which in spite of failing, did cost the lives of many awoken corsairs. At this, Mara would know no boundary to vengeance, and her fury would be legendary. She opened the reef to the Guardians and petitioned them to hunt down the treacherous fallen wolves and their terrible Kell, Skolas. Our search began with the assistance of Petra Venge, the Queen's Wrath. She would send us to the remains of the House of Winter's stronghold on Venus, where Skolas was proclaiming himself to be the Kell of Kells. According to tales, the Kell of Kells would unite all of the houses, all catches would be bent to him, and at last he would be acknowledged by the Great Machine, the Traveller itself. We quickly tore into him and his forces, and whilst he was able to both escape and pull the House of Winter into his fold, we were able to follow him to his next target, the House of Devils. Here, instead of direct usurpation, Skolas attempted a subtler tactic. He used the assassins of the Silent Fang to try and eliminate the leadership of the house. This would have left a power vacuum which Skolas could have stepped into, and thus used it to gain control of the house. However, the Devils were prepared for him, and we found our way into the Cosmodrome and traced back the Silent Fang, eventually destroying them, and giving Skolas no claim over the House of Devils. With this, Skolas pursued yet another house, and went after the House of Kings, attempting to forge a diplomatic alliance between the two so that he could keep his Kellship afloat. We interrupted this meeting between the Kings and the Wolves' Barons, and slew them all where they stood, ending Skolas' hope of attaining the support of any other houses in the system. With no further fallen to support his claim, Skolas changed tactics and this time attempted to claim weaponry that would afford him a significant advantage. It is here that he turned to the technology of the Vex and to the infamous Vault of Glass. Amongst its confines, Skolas would find copious amounts of Vex technology, thanks to the weakened architecture of this place now that we had raided it. The mighty fortress was still able, however, to commit and create oracles to the situation, and Skolas was attempting to capture and use them, with some degree of success as well, it is worth adding. However, we destroyed these oracles and denied Skolas the chance to use their power. With almost no more options, Skolas descended to the top of the Vex Citadel, a mighty and gravity-defying structure on Venus. There, he would hold his ground for a final stand. We pursued him, and even though he was able to use the Vex technology to pull the House of Wolves soldiers through time to his location, Skolas was unable to hold us back. A simple Kell is nothing to a Guardian prepared, and Skolas fell before us, laid low and left vulnerable for capture by the agents of the Reef. After being rewarded by Mara Sov and told of the thanks that the Reef would sing, we had the respect of a monarch, and a powerful ally was forged with the city. We would go on to defeat Skolas in one final combat. He languished yet again in the Prison of Elders, but his trial would be won in the ways of old, a trial by combat, and therefore we would be his judge, jury, and executioners. And in this trial by combat, there would be no mercy, and we would destroy the former Kell of the House of Wolves once and for all. But this was not the enduring legacy of Skolas. Instead, it was his final conversation with Mara that would be of concern. His last words would be of a dark binder and a light snuffer. They left him whimpering in fear. But with his fear, Mara would know well enough who he was speaking of. Her, Eris, and Osiris would all meet in secret to plan for what was to come next. Skolas' words were but another confirmation of what Mara already knew. A terrible shadow loomed on the horizon, and they needed to prepare for it. A plan was devised to defeat the coming threat, but it would come at great cost. For now, another monarch was approaching, and he desired one thing: vengeance. Behold the wrath of Oryx, bound in fury for the death of his son. The Taken King was making his way to our system, and in time he would make his mark upon our worlds in a manner that would be irrevocable. He would arrive in the system at Saturn's rings, and would immediately be met by Queen Mara Sov and a massive awoken fleet. Though the power of their vessels allowed them to contend with the Hive, it was the Queen's own devastating use of a weapon known as the Harbingers that would destroy Oryx's forces. But when Mara had gotten back to her feet, having exhausted herself in order to clear the way, one vessel still stood: Oryx's dreadnought. Upon the ship, the Taken King used the primary weapon of the vessel, allowing his throne world to fall outwards into real space, consuming and destroying all before him. Prince Aldrin was able to escape the terrible wave of paracausal energies, but Mara was left consumed by the wave, along with the Tekens Kali, Sadia, and Shuro-Chi. But Mara had accomplished her part of the plan. It was now up to Eris and the army of guardians that she had motivated to kill Oryx's son. The system of Sol would never be the same. With these events, the Taken War had begun. We only discovered Oryx's arrival in the system when we traveled to a Cabal base on Phobos, which was under attack by a strange new kind of enemy. As sterile neutrino scatter filled the atmosphere, and a shadowy presence moved its eyes to this part of the system, Eris's voice grew fearful, and then terrified. Finally, she cried out in horror at the realization that the father of her nemesis, the patriarch of the Osmium dynasty, was here. Oryx had come. He unleashed his armies of Taken across the system, populating our worlds with the dark and sickly forms of the foes we had once known that were now corrupted by darkness. The Taken had invaded. We quickly fled the moon of Phobos for our lives, and returned to the tower to meet with the Vanguard. Whilst Ikora and Zavala waited, it was Cade who would put a plan into action. He would task us with retrieving a stealth drive from the top of an old colony ship in the Cosmodrome. This stealth drive and Eris's ship that she had recovered from the Hellmouth would allow us to infiltrate the Dreadnought, although the stealth drive's malfunction led to the destruction of Eris's ship, as Oryx used his superweapon once again. Once aboard the Dreadnought, we disabled the weapon that had been attacking the Awoken fleet, and established a beachhead from which Guardians could assault Oryx's ship. We were, however, not alone on the vessel. A group of Cabal from the Skyburners Legion, led by their Primus himself, was in the process of invading the ship. But when faced with the power of Oryx, he was but a minor nuisance. Oryx took the Primus right before our eyes, but this was of little concern to us. For the Cabal, though, it would be a devastating blow, and the Skyburners Legion would be left listless in the command of its two Bond brother Vallaces. We, however, would push further into the ship in search of Oryx, and found our way blocked by a portal that could only be accessed by an Ascendant Hive. So, in order to gain ingress, we would have to be as our enemy was. We would have to become, or at least pass for, an Ascendant Hive. We first returned to the moon, and collected a portion of the crystal that once held Crota's soul, as he was being summoned back into the mortal realm. Following this, as well as the acquisition of personal stealth code from Warmind bunkers below Earth, we snuck back into Crota's own throne world, the Oversoul Throne. The Hive were holding a death ceremony for Crota there. We snuck in, and used the crystal we had gathered earlier to extract the essence of Crota's soul. The Hive detected us, and the Taken were unleashed to fight us, but thanks to Eris and a few tricks she had learned from Toland, we were able to escape. With the essence of Crota's soul now in tow, we returned to the Dreadnought, and were recognized by the portal as Ascendant. We journeyed deep into the heart of the Dreadnought, and found Oryx at the center of his defenses. At his altar, we found the God King of the Hive, And in spite of all his eons of war and all the power at his fingertips, we prevailed. We struck down the God King and broke his resolve upon the anvil of our light. Oryx was forced to make a choice. Needing to retreat, he summoned forth his power and took himself, allowing himself to escape so that he might live to fight another day. But regardless of the fact that he had escaped, Oryx's corporeal form had been shattered, and the God King's blade, Willbreaker, lay broken. From the remains of the sword, Eris took a shard and gifted it to us, allowing us to forge the first swords wielded by Guardians in generations, with a little assistance from Lord Shaxx. We had to set the darkness within our new blades into balance, and to empower them with light. By killing the sword of Oryx, Ektar, we were able to accomplish this. With our new blades in hand, we set to taking apart Oryx's taken forces within the system, killing his shades and his echoes throughout the worlds that were previously ours. He could not claim any more power when we had removed his stakes in these worlds, destroying those echoes. And with those echoes destroyed, we would descend upon his court, weakening those that fed him power through the tithe system that the Hive rule by. With all of his tribute weakened, finally, we set out once more to kill a god. And so yet again, 6 of us went down into the depths of the Dreadnought, accessing Oryx's throne world through his court and defeating his war priest, the beast Golgoroth, and his 2 daughters, Uranuk and Urhalak, before finally facing the Taken King himself. Oryx would make terrible doxologies to the darkness and would unleash the full nature of his power against us, as the sword logic dictated he must. But we were able to unleash a power of our own. By defeating the Light Eater ogres that had consumed great amounts of light, we were able to take this and set it free, detonating each orb of light like a bomb. This left Oryx decimated, and finally, after so many detonations had been struck, we broke the Taken King, and unlike his son, we broke him not merely with the powers of darkness, but instead with the power of the light. Sword logic had triumphed previously, but now we had shown the strength of the light. The inner complexities of the universe could be used instead of the simplicity and the edge of a blade. This was not sword logic, this was bomb logic. We slew Oryx utterly, and at long last, the lord and ruler of the Osmium dynasty, the scourge of 1,000 worlds and the bane of trillions upon trillions of souls, was vanquished. But the legacy of this era would not soon be forgotten. Not only did we have to deal with potential contenders to the throne, such as Malok and the Darkblade Alakul, but we also found his calcified fragments, and stored within them, we found the records of the Books of Sorrow. With these pieces, and with their plans in mind, Eris took the remnants of Oryx's war priest, his daughters, and the ravenous heart of Oryx himself, combining them into the weapon that the Books of Sorrow spoke of. She paused for but a moment as she considered whether to create it or not. But her overwhelming desire to see her every hatred imaginable placed upon the Hive drove her onwards. And when we who aided her in its construction had seen it completed, she gifted it to us. This would be the touch of malice, and it would repay every torment that the Hive had dealt, but this time in the hands of a Lightbearer. This would be the last remnant of Oryx, the means by which the God King would live on, and by which he would be empowered. But there was also one more threat that we had to deal with. The Cabal had sent a distress signal out from their vessel, the Dantalian Exodus 6. They had crashed it into the Dreadnought so that they might create a beachhead, but now they had retreated there, being pushed back by the remnants of the Hive and Taken forces that still swarmed the Dreadnought. Upon clearing them from the Dantalian Exodus 6's command center, we saw that a message had been transmitted by the Cabal forces of the Skyburners, and upon closer inspection, The headers of the message indicated that it was for the head of the Cabal Empire. In time, we would see this menace rise, but it would be at least another 2 years before we were faced with the terrible realization of who this would be. For now, we sat and waited, secure in the knowledge of our supremacy, until the next crisis loomed on the horizon. It was a mostly quiet year after we had defeated Oryx, the Taken King. The Taken War had left much of the system ravaged, from the Reef to Earth, to Mars, to Venus. But at long last, something new began to stir. Near the end of the summer, a strange grouping of nanites appeared within the Guardian population. They offered incredible benefits to the Guardians, but they also represented the risk of a major pandemic. And so, an organization known as the Owl Sector was activated in response to this sudden occurrence. The event, which would henceforth be known as the Transmission Crisis, was merely a precursor to what would come next. The nanites had originated from a Clovis Bray laboratory on Mars, where exploring Fallen from the House of Devils had broken in and had discovered the location of a valuable technology, Siva. With this, the fallen House of Devils were on the hunt, and returned renewed to a long-forgotten area of the Cosmodrome. They headed into its northeasternmost sector, and rediscovered the Plague Lands. And with that, an old wolf was roused from its vigil. Lord Saladin rose to face the House of Devils, and rallied the Guardians to retake Fellwinter Peak, which had been long silent since the Iron Lord's defeat at the hands of Siva. As we moved to retake the mountaintop fortress at Vostok Observatory, we were greeted by the proof of the new power in the House of Devils. The house had been taken over by its splicers, the bioengineers and body hackers that every house holds a host of. They had resurrected an all too familiar foe, Sepix Prime, but Sepix was different. Part of its shell was missing, and other parts held a new kind of metallic material that was clearly not of the Fallen's own making. We defeated this hulking monstrosity and sent the devils into a full retreat. When we regrouped with Lord Saladin, he told us of this once great fortress and gave us the honor of reigniting the ceremonial braziers within the Iron Temple, signaling the return of the Iron Lords. We were sent deeper into the Plague Lands to investigate the new source of power and the strange resurrection of Sepix Prime. It was here that we discovered that the Fallen had taken Siva and used it to augment themselves. For a Fallen, this would not only provide the practical advantages of making them stronger in combat, but with the Fallen's faith and their reverence towards machines, they believed that they were being elevated into demigods. Demigod or not, these cyborg Fallen were of course still just Fallen, and in spite of their upgrades, they were no match for us. We then pushed deeper into the Plague Lands and discovered that the Fallen had used Siva to recreate and re-empower artillery emplacements within the Plague Lands, posing an imminent threat to the city and to the Guardians operating in the area. We stormed their position with all haste so that we might not give them a chance to cause any damage. Our time was limited, and so we were alone, but eventually, we were victorious. It was then that Lord Saladin invited us back to the Iron Temple so that he could explain the history and story of the Iron Lords to us, as well as the story of how they had died to Siva. With this, we were sent to investigate the source of Siva itself, so following the word of the Cryptarch Tyra Khan, we went out to the Dust Palace on Mars, where we would find the original labs which the Fallen had broken into. Armed with more knowledge on Siva, and having established that the Fallen had not fully mastered it, we set out into the Plague Lands to destroy the source of the nanites, the replication complex where the Iron Lords had fought and died all those years ago, atop which there was now a great fallen fortress. It turned out that Yolda's original explosion had not destroyed the Siva replicator. It had merely damaged it and left it dormant. With the Fallen now exposing it, nanites were flooding the entirety of the Plaguelands once again, snaking back and forth in vines twisting but giant, 10 feet across at times. Siva was on the move, and we had to stop it. But we also needed to get through the Fallen's defenses, and so we sabotaged them, not only destroying them but also destabilizing all of the Siva in the area, significantly cutting it back. From there we pushed into the Archon's fortress, and found that as we headed down, the replication chamber was in reach. But when we entered the Siva replicator, we found something far more gruesome than merely the Fallen. We found that Siva had taken the bodies and weapons of the Iron Lords and had not killed them, but had twisted them and broken them, transforming their bodies and weapons into horrifying mockeries of what they once were. These were Siva Iron Lords, light weaponized against our light, and with that, we had no choice left but to free them and to kill the reanimated remains of these Iron Lords. Felwinter, Galeon, and Yolda met their final rest that day. With the battle won, we set the Siva replication complex to blow, and fled with our lives as fast as we could. Upon returning to the Iron Temple and giving Saladin Yolda's old helmet, he knew that at long last his friends had been laid to rest. And with this he presented us with a new sword, the Young Wolf's Howl, declaring us to be the first in a new generation of Iron Lords. But there was one final trial that remained. Shiro 4, the Vanguard scout assigned to the Iron Temple, intercepted a Fallen transmission coming from deep within the Plaguelands. What he had intercepted was a message from the new leader of the House of Devils, who was beckoning all the Fallen in the system to come to the Plaguelands, to a place that he was referring to as the Perfection Complex. He invited them to be reborn as demigods with Siva in hand. And this could mean only one thing. If the Fallen successfully gathered an army to their cause, they would be able to push out and attack the city, although this time they would be empowered by the power of the Siva, and they would not be fighting for the sake of reclaiming the Great Machine. Instead, they would strike out in the belief that they were gods, and that they were owed the right to purge those that had wronged them. At Six Fronts, at Twilight Gap, at every opportunity. Yet again, we were forced to assemble a team, and with the 6 of us united in our cause, we struck out into the Plaguelands to shatter the Devil Splicers and their command structure. In the process of this preemptive strike, we defeated the second in command of the Splicers, known as Vosek, the Archpriest, and we dismantled a terrifying siege engine atop a section of the Cosmodrome wall, which we sent plummeting into the sea. All of this before descending into the heart of the Perfection Complex itself, where the light ended and evolution began. It was here that we awakened and challenged Axis, the Archon Prime. The Fallen was no mere demigod according to them. It had been completely converted from biological being into mechanical beast. To the Fallen, Axis was a god. Not a demigod, not a pretender to some prophecy, but a true, fully fledged god. And with this, we needed to fight and destroy this machine now. For surely a god able to rally those to the banner cry of "I have defeated the Guardians, and I will now take their city" was all the more dangerous. And so we fought. But something that was quick to be realized by Axis was that evolution would not be enough. That's the thing about light. It shines where you least expect it, and even at the darkness where it ends, it can break through. Having broken the Splicers and left them leaderless, a new age dawned upon the city. We were triumphant, and the city was secure. And thus began what is known as the Age of Triumph. We took to celebrate our great victory over the many powers that had risen against us. The whole of the city embraced what would be a new era of short peace. The children who were once frightened by the stories no longer being told, and the dark forces that were encroaching upon the system, were no longer frightened at all. But the signs that this age was short-lived were already present. Eris Morn would abandon the tower, heading out into the deep black to face the enemies of humanity once again. And in addition, the Fallen broke ranks, abandoning their old allegiances and leaving their armory and heraldry to burn. At first, humanity saw the retreat as a joyous sign of victory. The 100-year siege in which the city had endured at the hands of the Fallen had finally come to an end. But alas, with the siege broken, a far greater power was waiting in the wings. A power that would strike hard and fast at our ranks and would pose the greatest challenge to us that we had ever suffered. The Age of Triumph would be closed dramatically under a red shadow led by a dominating commander. And his name would be Gaul. The Age of Triumph that had borne us into a brief moment of peace was shattered irrevocably by Dominus Gaul and his Red Legion, who attacked the city in force with their entire fleet. Gaul had originally risen to power by usurping the power of the previous Cabal Emperor, and with his mentor, the Consul, always at his side, the new leader of this entire civilization had brought the full might of the Cabal war machine to Earth. He arrived and broke through the city's defenses, approaching the Traveler with what can best be described as a cage. The Guardians of the city of course responded, and as we returned from our patrol on the edges of the outer system, we were thrust directly into the conflict. It was up to us to infiltrate Dominus Gaul's flagship, the Immortal, and to disable it so we could launch a conclusive assault upon the vessel. But as we headed to the upper decks so that we could be extracted, we came face to face with the Dominus himself, and he showed us the truest extent of his powers. The cage around the Traveler activated, sapping our abilities and stripping our light from us. Once more, we were mortal, and our ghost was left crippled. We were defenseless. As Dominus Gaul proclaimed victory over the city and decreed that we were unworthy of the Traveler's light, he kicked us from the deck of his ship and let us fall to Earth. Thus, with the single defeat ever served to the city, the Red War had begun. Darkness consumed our vision, and we received a dream from the Traveler. We dreamt of the darkness attacking and destroying our citizens, of the Traveler's seeding of our worlds, of the Cabal and their fleets, and a strange ship that we would come to know all too soon, and of long-lost techniques of light, with a staff, a sword, and a shield. Finally, the vision would show us a place on Earth. It would show us a shard of some kind that had fallen to Earth. This, as it turns out, was the shard of the Traveler in the European Dead Zone, and it was calling to us. This was our destination. But first, we needed to leave. We made our escape from the city through the sewer pipes and underground systems, out through the wall. For an entire 8 weeks, we trekked through rough terrain and Cabal-infested territory, until at last, we fell, exhausted in a glade. We awoke to see a friendly human face. Her name was Soraya Hawthorne, and she was evacuating soldiers and refugees to a place only referred to as the farm. Upon arriving, we could see the shard of the Traveler across the bay, and so we set out on a desperate quest to find out why the Traveler had called us to this place. In spite of the Fallen occupying the area and the new mortal threat that they posed to us, we pressed on, until at last we came to the base of the shard. Our ghost, left quivering and broken since the activation of the cage, was suddenly empowered, and with their revitalization, a beam of power surged through them and into us. Our mortal bonds were broken, and our light returned to us. With the brilliant new powers at our disposal, we returned to the farm, and began the inevitable duty once more of being a guardian. Before we could fight back though, we would need to be able to communicate with the rest of the system once more. After helping to establish this communications network, we picked up an emergency transmission from Commander Zavala, who had escaped and had ordered all the Guardians that still lived to regroup at Saturn's moon of Titan to prepare for a counterattack. In spite of Soraya's insistence that we should stay, we had a clear course. If the light still lived in us, we had to coordinate with the greater Guardian forces. The city was still at stake. And so we took our jump ship and headed to Titan to regroup with the other Guardians. When we arrived, the Guardians were in chaos, having uncovered an entire colony of Hive on the old rigs of the New Pacific Arcology, where they had tried to create a staging area. Our first task was therefore to secure the Arcology's maintenance rigs and to restore power to them so the base of operations could function. After having successfully done this, we were informed by Deputy Commander Sloan of a series of intercepted Red Legion communications that they needed help decrypting. In order to speed this process, we went into the depths of the Arcology and stole one of its CPUs, engaging in a daring escape in an old vehicle that led us through the entire length of the central Hive colony. With the messages decrypted, we learned of the true extent of the dire situation in which we now found ourselves. The Red Legion had not only taken the city, but had also maneuvered a massive weapon emplacement into orbit around our sun. This weapon platform was known as the Almighty, and if given the right commands, the Almighty could be used to detonate the sun, destroying our entire system. Our plans were now complicated by this new weapon and its destructive power, but knowing that our light had returned, Commander Zavala refused to give up, and relocated the surviving Guardian forces to the farm. Following this, we tracked Cade 6 to a far-flung planetoid called Nessus. This place had been completely consumed by the Vex and their infestation, and it was discovered here that Cade had travelled to the place in an attempt to retrieve a Vex teleportation device. This would give him a means of getting close enough to assassinate Dominus Ghaul if he was successful. However, not quite understanding the security systems of the teleporter or the Vex, Cade was trapped inside an infinite loop that teleported him all over Nessus, and was unable to escape. In the end, we freed Cade with the help of a new Golden Age friend, an AI from a Golden Age vessel that had crashed on Nessus long ago. Her name was Failsafe, and she had somewhat of a split personality, having been degraded over time and damaged. The Golden Age ship that she had crashed with was the Exodus Black, and Cade was then teleported there. He held up against a fallen assault, but eventually we freed him, and reunited with our old friend. Cade learned that the only one that needed to reunite with the old fire team was Ikora, and immediately directed us to Io, which was not only where we found her, but it was also a particularly holy site for warlocks, as it was the last place that the Traveler touched before heading to Earth during the events of the collapse. Io, as a result, was filled with the energy of the Traveler's light, and this had drawn the Cabal to it, who had begun to set up bases with the intent of mining that energy, although they were unsuccessful. Whilst both you and Ikora saw that this was clearly not going to work, they now understood the clear intentions of the Cabal. They were attempting to utilize the light. Ghaul's reasons for imprisoning the Traveler were made all the clearer now, given that the Traveler was the light's source. He wished to be chosen as a Guardian, and he wished to be the Traveler's worthy warrior, leading at the head of an entire army of chosen Cabal, ones that would use the light as a weapon of conquest, given to them by their right of might. After discovering this, we were forced to repel a taken invasion on Io. They were drawn by the Traveler's energy, and in the process of doing this, we met a rather peculiar warlock known as Ashamir, an old friend of Eris Morn's. Following this, we needed to further analyze the Almighty, and knowing that there was a dormant Warmind bunker in the system that might scan the Almighty for weaknesses, we endeavored to embark on another journey. We entered the bunker and used its systems to scan the Almighty. After doing this, we unfortunately discovered that the Almighty was irrevocably tethered to our sun. Destroying the Almighty would also create a chain reaction that would destroy our sun, and so the safest option would instead be to disable the weapon. From here, we returned to Earth and undertook a plan to defeat the Cabal. The commander of the European Dead Zone's Cabal force, Thumos the Unbroken, was holed up in his ship, the Orbas Ventura. Killing him was something that would aid the resistance efforts, but he was a linchpin to the plan. Killing him would give us access to his personal shuttle codes, a shuttle that would be registered with the Cabal IFF system. This meant that we'd be able to board the shuttle, get close to the Almighty, and then enter it to shut it down. At the same time, the city would be attacked by the joint forces of the Guardians, who would make a final desperate bid to place the Vex teleporter as close to Gaul's command ship as possible. Following this, we would return from the Almighty, and then hopefully find the city's forces that had besieged the Cabal within the city itself, use the teleporter, and then defeat Dominus Gaul. All the while that this was happening, Gaul had been talking with the Speaker, who he had captured during the initial assault on the city. They spoke constantly, trading jabs and insults and occasionally trading knowledge. All of this continued up until the point that there was an attack on the Almighty, and the Speaker made a stunning confession to Gaul that, contrary to popular belief that he himself had helped to propagate, the Traveller did not speak to him, and that during his entire time guiding the city as its patriarch, he had allowed everyone around him to perpetuate this ignorant, foolish belief. This, along with the constant irritation that the consul had always offered, left Gaul enraged. He killed the consul and left the Speaker to die, and endeavored to force the Traveller's light upon himself. He would not be chosen. He would do as the Cabal did. He would take the light. When we finally disabled the Almighty, and our plans started to fall into action, we returned and arrived to the city. Our shuttle was shot down not far from where Zavala, Ikora and Cade were, but the Vanguard fire team was wounded on a rooftop, and we had to head through the Vex teleporter and stop Gaul alone. We were the only ones with the light, and we were the only ones that could stop him from taking over the system and draining the Traveller's power. We boarded the Almighty and faced Gaul on the topside deck of his flagship, where we discovered that he had grossly empowered himself with the light and had gained the ability to use some of our own powers. Now, a terrible menace in combat, Gaul pursued us and battled us across the deck of his ship. But the light that the Cabal had stored was not enough power for Gaul to defeat us, and so, eventually, we fought him back. Continually, he re-empowered himself with the power of the light. Every time, it would burn him back, dealing more damage to him, until eventually, our light proved stronger. Gaul fell, and we proved once and for all that Guardians were chosen. But this death was not the last thing we would see of him. Gaul was able to temporarily manifest as some kind of massive avatar of himself. In his new titanic form, he believed himself to be a god. He believed himself victorious, and he told the city below to witness the dawning of a new age. And it would be the dawning of a new age, but Gaul would not be a part of it. For he had forgotten about the greatest of humanity's saviors, the one that would ultimately deliver us through the time of darkness. He had forgotten about the Traveller. It was at this moment that the bonds of the cage broke, being unable to contain the new power waking within. The Traveller arose once more, and Gaul was burnt away by its light before the cage and the outer shell utterly shattered. The Traveller was free. The Traveller had truly returned to life, and with that, the Guardians had all seen their powers return, and a wave of light spread out across the universe from its return. It washed over the Calorish spires on Mercury, to Hellas Basin on Mars, to the tangled shore of the Reef, and even to the darkest reaches of the Dreadnought, still hanging in orbit around Saturn. It reached out further and further into the universe, illuminating our whole galaxy. But when it finally reached the dark space beyond, it was stopped. The light's return had awakened its equal. Just as the warlock Ulan Tan dictated, where there is light, by the nature of the universe's symmetry, you must also have shadow. And so it was that the ancient enemy of the Traveller, the darkness, was also awakened once more. Before we could truly feel the repercussions of the Traveller's return, we had one final mystery to attend to. In the new tower, an invitation was left for us. It congratulated us on our murder of Dominus Gaul. It was from a certain Emperor Callus, and he had invited us to join him at his Leviathan, to test ourselves, and to, as he would put it, grow fat from strength. We boarded this massive vessel, which it turned out we had seen in our vision from the Traveller. The vessel had begun to consume and orbit the planetoid of Nessus, using it for fuel and sustenance, and it was clear that Callus at this point was a Cabal, the Cabal being the only ones capable of not only hosting a series of Cabal soldiers, but also of designing a machine that could consume an entire planet. Beyond all of this, it was clear that Callus was indeed the former Emperor of the Cabal, the one that Dominus Gaul had deposed. Callus then put us through a series of 3 tests in order to determine our worth as warriors, before we found ourselves standing before him in his ornate throne room. What ensued was a battle against the former Emperor. But as time went on, and the Emperor was damaged by our weapons fire, it suddenly became clear that we were not fighting the real Emperor Callus, but merely a robotic automata that was imitating him. Upon defeating the machine, we heard it speak of how it had seen a power greater than our light, and that we should heed its word, take these rewards, and grow fat from strength. We were then handsomely rewarded, and it was made clear that we had not seen the last of this mysterious Emperor Callus, or these crazed automata that he would speak through. The events of the Traveller's reawakening would be felt far and wide across the system, and would start what is known as the Second Golden Age for humanity. However, the first new adventure awaiting us on the horizon would stir the return of legends and myths, and would start in the blazing sands of Mercury. Osiris had returned. With the pulse of light emanating from the Traveller, the whole system awakened with activity, not the least of which came from the Vex on Mercury. Not only were there reports of a massive Vex gateway activating suddenly in the middle of the Caloris Sands, there was also a finding made by hidden scouts positioned on Mercury. In the sands just outside the gate, they had found the ghost of a rather strange guardian, one that was infamous to the city and one who now appeared to be in trouble. This was Sagira, the ghost of the rather infamous warlock Osiris. Sagira had been damaged in an attack on the pair within the vast simulation engine of the Infinite Forest, which lay below Mercury's surface. Just before the pair had been attacked, Osiris had comprehended that the Vex mind Panoptes, which was responsible for the Infinite Forest, was also capable of now simulating a future in which the Vex achieved their ultimate victory. This would be their goal of creating a universe without light or dark, where the Vex were the beginning and the end, where they were able to calculate their victory entirely, and where none would be able to stop them. Previously, we had stopped the dangerous methods of time control used by the Vex in places such as the Vault of Glass, but with a simulation that would allow them to chart their path to a perfect future, the Vex would be able to become the ultimate arbiters of the universe, and they would ensure that neither light nor dark would exist. All this would be explained to us in time, but first we had to investigate the gateway into the forest and gain ingress. When we were not able to access it, the Vex in the area responded in force, deploying Vex from the future timelines. This was a sign of the danger present, as the Vex would only draw upon such forces if they were truly threatened. After defeating them, we rendezvoused with Brother Vance in the old lighthouse at the Caloris Spires. Brother Vance was a disciple of the Osirian cult, one that followed Osiris from the city with a certain level of obsession. It was not backed by Osiris, who had always found them to be irritating to say the least, but they had made every effort to study his teachings and to learn from his so-called prophecies. Vance suggested taking Sagira's damaged shell to one of the Assyrian cult's bases within the European Dead Zone. This base had unfortunately been overrun with Fallen, but regardless, whilst there we were able to revive Sagira, who temporarily took over our ghost's shell so that she could coordinate with us. She then led us into the Infinite Forest, where we found Osiris's reflections. The Warlock had used the technology of the Vex to copy himself and to duplicate throughout the forest so that he could cover more ground. One of these reflections would then explain the nature of the threat that Panoptes posed to us by showing us the simulated future that awaited us if we failed to stop the Vex. In order to prevent this dark future, the solution was simple. We had to kill Panoptes and wrest the Vex's control of the forest. In order to do this, we needed to retrieve a map of the Infinite Forest so that we might be able to find Panoptes, and after doing this, it was determined that we needed more data to find the Vex Mind. Ikora and Sagira discovered that along with the map, the best way to find Panoptes would be to trace the Vex simulation back to the point at which it was simulated to have an origin in its timeline. This was when Panoptes had been created, within the simulated past that could be found within the forest. We could then use this information to track the trajectory that Panoptes had forged, and ultimately we could use this along with the map to find him in the present. Complex as all this might sound, this allowed us to gain a set of coordinates to Panoptes' location, although Sagira was captured in the process. After being ejected from the Infinite Forest, Ikora Ray met us at Mercury, and forced the gateway open for us again so that we could head to those coordinates where Panoptes would end up. There, we battled with the Vex Mind, and with the aid of the Warlock Osiris and his reflections, we defeated it utterly. After defeating the Vex Mind, Osiris took his first steps outside the forest since he had entered it upon his exile, and exchanged a few kind words with his student, Ikora Ray, before returning to guard over the forest and to keep the Vex in check, once and for all. However, our adventures with the Vex did not end here. One day, our team ventured back into the Leviathan and found our way through its engine room. After being assaulted by Cabal forces for our intrusion, Callus himself called the attack off and stated that perhaps we could help the Cabal with an engine problem that they had developed. Upon further inspection, as we were blasted into the smelting core of the Leviathan, it was seen that it had swallowed the entirety of the planet core mind of Nessus, a massive Vex that would be known as Argos. Argos had activated a defensive shield that had stopped all momentum within the Leviathan's furnaces, immobilizing it and preventing it from going any further or performing some of its standard functions. However, through teamwork and with the application of the plentiful firepower that we had gathered, we were able to destroy the Vex core mind, and we were saved from annihilation by Callus, and once again, for our efforts we were handsomely rewarded. But old powers were stirring and returning to life once more, and they would be the next ones to shake the system. The Traveler's Light had not only acted as disturbing presence to the Vex, but it had also stirred ancient forces that lay buried on Mars within the region known as Hellas Basin. We intercepted a distress signal coming from the area, which turned out to be none other than the notorious gunslinger Anna Bray. It turned out that Anna had not in fact fallen at the Battle of the Twilight Gap, but had instead deliberately faked her own death so that she could pursue her heritage and more knowledge on the Warmind Rasputin. The Vanguard had always hounded her for the pursuit of this knowledge, and now she could pursue it in peace. Her search had taken her here, to Mars, where thanks to the Traveler's returning light, the ice around Rasputin, which had been used in the collapse to imprison Zol and Nokris, was beginning to thaw. Now the Warmind was left surrounded by an army of frozen Hive, led by an exiled Hive prince, and by Zol, the will of thousands. After reclaiming the Brave facilities and having a run-in with Zavala, Anna and the commander immediately fell into conflict over the course of action that should be taken against Zol and Nokris. Anna believed that the Warmind Rasputin, if correctly directed and encouraged, could work as their ally, whereas Zavala saw it as dangerous and as a tool that needed to be brought under control and contained, and then never used. Regardless, the Hive would need to be drawn out in order to be defeated, and in order to do this, we decided to head to the European Dead Zone and collect a small shard of the Traveler to act as bait to lure them out. In this encounter, Anna Bray demonstrated a remarkable ability to coordinate Rasputin and to get him to break down the taken shielding that was locking the shard of the Traveler in place. With this, we headed deep into the Hive lair that held Nokris, and we defeated the Herald of Zol, planting the bait for the greater threat of the Worm God itself. When finally we confronted the Worm God, we were utterly powerless, and its darkness was so intense that it was capable of immobilizing us and leaving us for dead under a collapsing snowbank. Fully awakened, Zol would now make a desperate push for the Warmind and its critical systems in a bid to take it out once and for all. But throughout our tenure on Mars, Rasputin had been supplying us with a weapon of its own design, a relic known as the Valkyrie, a spear bristling with the energy of the Warmind itself that was capable of intense damage when thrown. Now, it was time to forge a new Valkyrie, of even greater might, one that could be used to defeat Zol. We systematically overloaded Rasputin's core in order for its power to swell, and we then converted its overwhelming energy into the new Valkyrie, supercharging it and giving us the perfect weapon with which to defeat Zol. The titanic worm god roared above us, and rose in size to a height so great that it utterly dwarfed us. But with the aid of the javelin, we were able to bring this beast down, as well as all of its Hive servants. With the Valkyrie in hand, we went about slaying this worm god. And finally, it fell. As Rasputin was saved, we gathered with Zavala and Anna Bray in Rasputin's control center, and the Warmind spoke to us for the first time in centuries, declaring itself to be the greatest defender of humanity. Whilst previously it had shrugged off its duties of defense during the collapse, it had returned and has begun to launch an entirely new Warsat network into the system to assist humanity. No longer would it be the broken fragments of itself that we had found on Earth. Now Rasputin had truly returned, and with the new Warsat network in orbit, all of his systems would come back online. The Warmind was back in play, and with it, we had gained a powerful ally. But beyond just this, Rasputin asserted its independence from the Vanguard, and stated that it would aid humanity in their survival by its own self-determination, and that it had to be respected by groups such as the Vanguard, which simply used it as a tool wherever they saw it necessary. Whilst this left Zavala uneasy, Anna Bray was able to stay behind as a liaison and as the voice of the Warmind, and would work with Guardian interests at heart. Rasputin would be a great defender once again, and would not be something co-opted by the system as our needs desired. Rasputin would smite the threats that he saw coming, and would aid us in many different endeavors in the time to come. It was then that we received yet another message from Emperor Callus, who invited us back to the Leviathan to deal with yet another problem. This time Callus's ship was being invaded by Val Kaur, the last commanding officer of the Red Legion. Kaur had planned to commandeer the Leviathan and to use it as a command and control vessel from which the remaining Red Legion loyalists could change the tide of what was to them still the Red War. Even though they had been utterly defeated, they held on to a stunning hope that they might still attain victory if they could only wrest control of the Leviathan from Callus. But with our intervention, we not only decimated Kaur himself, but also used the Leviathan's weaponry to utterly destroy the remains of the Red Legion fleet. With this, a small time of peace came upon the Guardians, and we remembered those that we had lost in the Red War, all too unaware that soon we were about to lose even more. The final act of the story so far began with a voice inside the mind of the Prince of the Reef, Prince Uldren. He believed this voice to be Mara, his sister, who he had been searching for since the start of the Taken War. But the voice was in fact the voice of Riven, and it would slowly drive him to madness. But why was Riven communing with him, and what could she possibly want? The explanation is better understood if we step back to the unseen events of the Taken War. As Oryx assaulted Mara's fleet, he had been able to gain access to the Dreaming City. Here, he found Riven, the last of the species of dragons known as Ahamkara. The two of them addressed each other, and Oryx asked Riven if she wanted him to take her. To this, Riven skillfully replied, "Only if you wish it." As Oryx took her, he had unknowingly been tricked, and Riven had bound him to a contract of wish magic, meaning that she had still been taken, but that the binding for her was different. When Oryx perished, unlike the Taken, who were beholden to a higher power, she was able to regain a semblance of her free will. With this, Riven was free to do as she pleased, and it is believed that in this time she made another wish with another Hive God, the Hive God Savathun. This would result in Riven sending ripples throughout the system, down a path of delicately manipulated threads that would start with a brother driven mad with grief and would end in the possible doom of the awoken people. Uldren would be led to discover a heretical fallen Archon, and he would save his life. The name of the Archon was Fikrul, and he was resurrected with ether that had been scorched into dark ether, heavy with Taken energy. He had become the first of the Scorn, an entirely new race made up of the freakishly mutated Fallen that had been brought back from the dead as mindless slaves. Together, the Fanatic and Uldren destroyed the last of the old fallen houses that still remained, the House of Kings. Fikrul then went out into the system and raised 7 other Fallen to prominence, elevating them to the rank of Barons within the new Scorn hierarchy. Uldren then allowed himself to be taken in, and the Barons were for the most part captured by Cade 6 and the forces of the Reef, including its acting regent, Petravenge. The Barons and Uldren were sent to languish within the Prison of Elders, but they would not stay here for long. After being convinced that the fallen people would not survive without his leadership, Varix the Loyal released the Barons of the Scorn and Uldren, as well as the entire population of the Prison of Elders, starting a massive prison riot and creating the possibility for a major outbreak in the system of its most dangerous criminals. Petravenge called upon Cade 6 to put an end to the riot with her, and he decided to bring along his most trusted guardian, us. The prison was chaotic, but we were successful in our task of locking it down. However, the Scorn Barons had escaped their containment cells, and they were now headed to the lower levels to exfiltrate. Cade decided to destroy the localized network hub of the Prison of Elders so that he could crash it down into the lowest levels, not only potentially cutting off the Barons, but also affording him a faster method of intercepting them. We quickly went in pursuit of Cade and encountered the forces of the Scorn for the first time. But when we saw a small wave of light radiate out from Cade's position, we realized that his ghost, Sundance, had been killed. Sundance was shot by one of the Barons, known as the Rifleman, Purha, and with that, he was then pummeled into submission by another Baron known as Rexis Vaughn, the Hangman. Uldren took Cade's weapon, the Ace of Spades, and leveled it at the Hunter Vanguard. What would Cade's defiant last words be? "How's your sister?" And then, Cade was shot in the chest and began to fade away. We arrived just in time to hear our old friend's last words, and to see Uldren escape. Petra would arrive moments later, just as Cade had died in our arms. Cade's death wasn't just the loss of a hero or a friend. For many Guardians, losing Cade was akin to losing a piece of one's very identity. When we returned Cade's body, Ikora preached vengeance and sought to pursue Aldrin throughout the Tangled Shore with every single Guardian at their disposal. But Zavala stated that the Vanguard could not be stretched more thinly than they already were, and that to abandon the duty of the city would be foolish. Ikora called his opinion cowardice, but knew there was little more that she could do. The Vanguard needed to remain united. However, for us, the situation was far simpler than that. Cade was our friend, and he had been murdered in cold blood by Prince Aldrin and his Scorn Barons. And what's more, the murder had happened right in front of us by one we had always desired to hate. Aldrin might try to kill us too if he was given the chance, but he would get no such chance. Aldrin's Sov was ours, and for the first time in 5 long years, we voiced this sentiment, saying the first 8 words we had spoken in a long time as a simple declaration that we would find Aldrin and take our revenge. With this stunning moment, we walked out and headed straight to the Tangled Shore. This was the most lawless frontier in all the system, where the asteroid belt and the reef collided with a space that technically had no laws at all. This place was teeming with pirates and outlaws that had been holding up in hiding places, such as Quitter's Well or Thieves' Landing. But we also knew that amongst these places lay the Scorn and their barons, as well as their leader, Prince Aldrin, who we intended to bring to justice. As we trekked out across the high plains, we were contacted by Petra Venge, who then brought us before the shore's only law, the Spider, the most notorious fallen gangster on the shore. He had recently been forced out of his own stronghold by the Scorn, and we decided that clearing out the Scorn Barons from this stronghold served all of our purposes, and so we made a deal with the Spider. The Barons escaped as we cleared the stronghold, and this meant that we had to start tracking them down one by one. The Spider would inform us as to each of them and their whereabouts, but it would be us that would have to hunt them down. But hunt them down we did. Every single one of the Barons was slaughtered to the last, and so it was that we claimed the lives of Yavex the Rider, Pirha the Rifleman, Rexus Van the Hangman, Alycrus the Machinist, Canix the Mad Bomber, Araskis the Trickster, and Hyrax the Mindbender. We finally managed to track down Aldrin and the Fanatic, who were making a break for an awoken watchtower on the edges of the Tangled Shore. This watchtower linked the Tangled Shore to the Dreaming City, and Aldrin intended to infiltrate it and open its gateway using the dark energy that had been building within him and a shard of the Traveler that he had stolen at Riven's urging. Riven had been in Aldrin's head this whole time, creating hallucinations of Mara, pressing Aldrin to release her from the supposed cage of the Dreaming City. As we arrived at the watchtower, we killed the Fanatic, Fikrul, and with him defeated, the last of the Scorn Barons was gone. But Fikrul was not gone for good. He would always be able to return, and continues to plague the Tangled Shore to this day. We made our way further into the watchtower's depths, until we found Aldrin, who had been rewarded for opening the gateway by being consumed by the voice of Riven, an ascendant taken chimera, who was sent forth by Riven as the first arbiter through the gateway. Upon defeating this monstrous creature, we were able to see Aldrin coughed back up by the monster, and it is here that we claimed the Ace of Spades, and saw justice done unto the Prince of the Awoken. But a secret was kept that day, the secret of whether it was us or Petra Venge that would be the executioner of Aldrin. Aldrin's final words would stick with us, and remind us that the line between light and dark was a very thin one, precariously trodden by Guardians and Awoken alike. But Aldrin would die, and with Aldrin's death, Petra would ask us to meet her in the Dreaming City, to perform another task. We discovered there that both the Scorn and the Taken had begun to war over the remains of this once sacred place. On our way to meet Petra, we saw Taken Tekens, namely Kali, Sadir and Shuro-Chi. They had been on the ship with Mara when it had been utterly decimated by Oryx's main weapon during the Taken War's outbreak, and they had been converted into Taken themselves. After facing them briefly, we were transported into the Ascendant Realm, and were then greeted by a disembodied soul, a strange, quivering white light that we had seen previously as we assaulted the Taken King's throne world. But this time the light communicated with us, and it turned out that it was Toland, who greeted us and called us foolish, but warned us that this place was only made for the plots and schemes of gods and queens. He led us back to the Ascendant Plane, where we would find Petra Venge. When we discovered Petra, we met her at a grand machine known as the Oracle Engine, which was capable of reaching out across space to transport and communicate individuals and their wills. Through this, the supposedly dead monarch of the Awoken, Mara Sov, reached out and spoke to us and Petra, revealing that it was indeed Riven that had corrupted and manipulated Uldren. This was not some manifestation of Riven's will, however. The Oracle Engine was a purely Awoken creation, and it was indeed Mara this time. For the sin of Riven's usurpation of her brother's will, there would be nothing short of an extreme response. Petra was instructed by Mara to gather a team of Guardians and to assault Riven in the heart of the Dreaming City. We would once again assemble a raid team and march upon the great fortress of the enemy. Riven, who was now trapped in the Queen's Walk, was holed up like a commander inside their tower. We would breach their defenses and strike them down. In the path to Riven stood many obstacles, including two of the Tekens, Kali and Shuro-Chi. We freed both of them from their Taken bondage, and they talked to us on the nature of Riven's power. We also heard the voice of Riven, speaking to us through the many voices of our friends. It was clear that this was an attempted manipulation, but still, we pressed on, taking down a Spire Keeper, and finally unlocking the mechanism of the vault that opened onto the Queen's Walk. After we had faced all of these challenges, it was hard not to think of the words of Riven. The fact that she had indeed seen our great wish, and seen that we wished to kill her. Riven was pleased by the power of this wish. 6 immortal god-killers were coming through all of her defenses and using their light to crush enemies in their way, all so that they could reach Riven, all so that they could kill her. It is delightful to wish and bargain with an Ahamkara, but only as long as you do not see what they intend for you, and many that bargain with the Ahamkara will lose. As we went down to the Queen's Walk to face Riven, we saw the last of the Ahamkara for ourselves. Titanic in her size, and with her new Taken powers at her disposal, Riven truly was one of the most terrifying threats that we had ever faced. But our desire for vengeance outweighed any Taken power she possessed, and our light burned with anger. It was this monster that had corrupted Uldren, and indirectly it was this monster that had slain our friends. We struck out, not just with light, but with rage. We slew the last dragon, and finally the legacy of the Great Hunt was complete. Riven was slain. But of course, as all Ahamkara are able to do, she was able to commune with us, and even beyond her death, there was more to be done. We rushed her heart to the Tekens so that they might contain it, Shuro-Chi and Kali now being lucidly returned to the light. And when we had contained her heart, Riven told us that ours was not in fact the last wish, and that one wish granted deserved another. I cannot wait for you to see what she wished for. Those were the words that Riven spoke to us, and this wish would be made oh so very clear when we returned to the Dreaming City. Riven had unleashed a curse upon it, The blight that had once only been found within the inner sanctum closest to Riven's control was now all over the Dreaming City, and Riven had reached out one last time, irrevocably changing this space. 6 powerful Godslayers had unleashed their wills and wished for the death of the last Ahamkara, and this was fuel enough for a curse so dreadful that the Dreaming City still experiences it to this day. It runs in a 3-week cycle, with 1 week being relatively calm, 1 having middling corruption, and 1 where the corruption is almost complete. The cycle, as far as we can tell, infinitely repeats, and there are hints that the blade transform mind Korea that was taken by Oryx long ago may be involved, although speculation on this particular matter is highly unclear. What we do know is that the source of the corruption came from a great structure below the Blind Well, from a hallway known as the Confluence. The Blind Well itself was a mechanism constructed by the Awoken long ago that could be used to siphon our light into a powerful charge that would build over 3 weeks. This would charge the gateway found at the Confluence and allow us ingress into the Ascendant Realm. It was there that we entered a throne world, one of an incredible design, an Awoken throne world. This was how Mara had survived the attack from the beginning of the Taken War. She had not truly died. She had been trapped within Oryx's netherworld, but when he had died, she was able to make it back to the shores of this place known as Eleusinia. The structure, however, was broken and damaged. Oryx's agents had defiled this place, and now it was occupied by another hive, one of the supposed daughters of Savathun herself, a witch known as Dul Inkaru. She was apparently the source of the corruption, and she was able to be destroyed, but only at the apex of the corruption in the 3-week cycle. And no matter how many times she had been killed, the cycle would still repeat, and she would always come back. In addition, we were able to enter the Oracle Engine every 3 weeks, and would be transported to Mara, who had set up her court in view of the Milky Way. We were able to hear her input on the situations that were manifesting over the next few months, and it was at this moment that we saw her examine the darkness, commune with the Nine, chastise us for killing Aldrin, verbally abuse our ghost, who had believed that she had been stewing in inaction, and finally, she would bid us farewell, in order to go off and play another part in the cosmic war that was fast approaching. It was also in the Queen's Court that we were able to lean into an observation table, at which point we saw a vision. We saw Prince Aldrin being resurrected within the Dreaming City by a ghost. Prince Aldrin, who had become a guardian, though this was the last that we would see or hear of him, and he has not been sighted since. Back in the tower, however, a new face emerged. His name was unknown, and he preferred to go by a moniker that everyone could remember. They called him the Drifter, and he offered Guardians a new competitive arena called Gambit, which not only allowed them to fight the enemies of humanity, but also forced them to exploit the darker powers so that they might be able to learn how to best bend those powers of darkness to their will. These games would continue for the foreseeable future, in spite of the fact that the Vanguard and other elements such as the Praxic Order would not officially endorse them. All of this behind the scenes was set up by a most infamous figure, Shin Malphur, the man with the golden gun. Though his reasons are too complex to get into at this moment, Shin wished for us to learn more powers than merely the light. He wished for us to evolve and to become a stronger weapon against the darkness. After the main events of the Forsaken campaign, we would next see a new tale emerge. A mysterious annex in the tower opened up, and in this annex a new vendor known as Ada 1 could be found. She represented the final remnant of the prestigious Black Armory, a weapons foundry that had been created in the Golden Age and could create some of the finest weapons possible. Ada 1, however, did not trust the Guardians at first, given that during the Dark Age, when she had been resurrected as an Exo, there were many ensuing warlords, or rogue risen, that had made an effort to kill her and other members of the Black Armory team. Ada 1 to this day is the only survivor. After recapturing forges for her and eventually decrypting the secrets of the Black Armory, Ada would begin to trust us. And with that, we helped her hunt down and reactivate a series of devices across the system with which we could forge new implements of war. In this process, we discovered a fallen crime syndicate known as the Kell Scourge, led by a fallen known as Civics, lost to none. The gang was intent on supplying weapons with Black Armory technology in them to any who would be willing to buy, Civics' only priority seemingly being to create anarchy across the system. At a certain point, Civics and the Kell Scourge grew bold enough to even make a daring attack on the city. Not a full-fledged attack like Twilight Gap or Six Fronts, but merely a break-in, where they weakened the defenses around a Black Armory vault in the old ruined Botza district, a vault known as Vault Ebisu. Inside lay not only precious Black Armory wares, but also the Black Armory's history. It was crucial that we recovered this. Using Black Armory and Fallen technology, however, the Kell Scourge had constructed a giant Fallen mechanism known as Insurrection Prime, which we destroyed and defeated, saving the Black Armory's vault from being completely plundered. Finally, in the process of reforging a powerful weapon once used by Ada, we would kill Civics and end the threat of the Kell Scourge for good. This would allow us to return the weapon to Ada, and we would discover that she had used it to defend the Black Armory's founder and her former mother, Henrietta Meran. It turned out that the Black Armory papers, another relic salvaged from Vault Ebisu and the various Fallen that we killed them off, had indeed also contained notes about Ada 1 and her creation. Henrietta documented all of her thoughts in them, and when we recovered all the pages, Ada thanked us, maybe now at last trusting us. Then, we recovered one final piece of technology, an obsidian accelerator, unlocking the final purpose of Ada 1. She was a mobile forge, able to imbue the phase technology of the Black Armory at will. She had been a combination of both the exotechnology of Clovis Bray and the miraculous forges that the Black Armory had endeavored to create. She was the brainchild, not of Henrietta Meran, but of her peer, Helga, who had always believed that despite Clovis Bray's somewhat more dubious nature, they were valuable, and that their technology could be made to serve the armory. It turned out that she was indeed correct. Later in the year, we were invited by the Drifter to join in his games once again, and to take part in a new scheme that he called Gambit Prime. In the process of this, we also discovered that the Drifter had been working with a mysterious organization called the Nine. The organization reached out to the Drifter through their agents, namely the Emissary, who was once a guardian of the city and a retainer to the Awoken Queen known as Orin, now titled Orin the Lost after she went out to pursue the Nine after the death of her lover. In a series of invitations to understand, we were shown the truth of the relationship between the Drifter and Orin, as well as a few key moments and key truths and ponderings of the Nine regarding various other characters within Destiny's universe. The ninth and final of these invitations gave us a vision of the Drifter being told to keep Gambit running, as well as the attached activity of Reckoning. The Nine had helped him set this up, and the Nine had warned him that soon darkness would be coming, and that they would need to make ready for it. The Drifter also at this point asked us whether we were loyal to him or the Vanguard, and offered us a choice. Many Guardians were given these choices, and whether you were loyal to the Vanguard or not was entirely a point to be answered by yourself. But regardless, we would be able to partake in Gambit and its games no matter what we did. Finally, at the start of the summer, we were contracted again by the joyful Emperor Callus, who invited us once more to grow fat from strength. Having seen us perform incredible feats across the system, it was Callus's belief that he could recruit us to become a shadow. Shadows, in the context of Callus's cabal, were powerful agents, assassins, generals, and leaders of Callus's forces. They always represented the apex of their species in every possible facet of their specialization. Shadows were given a certain amount of autonomy, but they were bound to Callus's will, and Callus had made it clear to us by this point that his goal was not to serve the light. Callus would relay to us a series of dubious histories known as the Chronicon that were likely doctored to approve a more loyalist-friendly version of history. Regardless, the encounter in question that is of most incredible note is that at one point during his exile, Callus supposedly encountered the darkness, and saw it to be the coming end of the universe. He then believed it to be his divine right and his divine purpose to usher in the Age of Darkness and prepare us all for the end of the world by allowing conflict to subside, and to allow as many as possible to live in harmony for the remainder of the universe's time. This was the purpose for which Callus wished to recruit us, and Callus would lead us into the menagerie where he had placed many challenges for us to prove our worth once again. And of course, as his moniker of Grow Fat from Strength would suggest, with these challenges came great rewards. After this, Callus asked us for one more favor in dispatching a Hive champion that had betrayed him. In his time of exile, Callus had retaken an Athenaeum world, an archival world of the Cabal. Within it, he found a Hive crown, which showed the potential to control the Hive swarms. Not wishing to wear the crown personally, lest it should corrupt him, Callus instead used the incredible gene manipulation technology of the Cabal to spawn a mighty warrior named Galran, titanic in his size. Galran had been edited to hold a greater strength of mind than the typical Cabal soldier. This was still pointless though, as Galran was corrupted within minutes of the Crown of Sorrow being placed upon his head. Callus therefore asked us to revoke this power, and to bring him to heel, killing him, which we did in no short order. With Galran's fall came another period of uneasy calm, but as the year, filled with hard moments and grueling tests, came to a close for us, an entirely different chapter was about to begin. It was suddenly becoming clear that at this time, new lights were starting to fast approach. Saviors of humanity had always been rising, but for some unknown reason, there was a mass of new guardians, new lights that were joining our ranks, strengthening the many friendships created and many new fire teams forming along the way. The Guardian Orders as a whole began to grow stronger as their numbers swelled, with Guardians returning from old frontiers and new lights joining our ranks. But this was all for the better, because on the horizon, the darkness was closer than we thought. Once again, it was brewing, and just as it had done before, it began to creep towards us. As it had done before at the Battle of Mare Ibrium, during the events of Crota's Rise, the moon would play host to nightmares, and these nightmares would find Eris Morn. Thank you so much for listening and for watching the video. If you made it to the end all in one sitting, you're an absolute monster. You really do deserve a pat on the back. That's probably the biggest YouTube video I've ever made, and it's probably one of the biggest YouTube videos you've ever watched. Remember, however, that there are several things you can do if you really want to show your appreciation. First of which is you should go down into the comments section
Alright guys, so let me queue up the next part. It's only 30 minutes I think, let me double check that, but You know, you guys, yeah, it's it's quite fun. My mind is getting blown. I just didn't know there's much to this. Okay, so let me figure out how to find the next part. Okay, give me give me like a minute or two. Be right back. Part 2. There should be a link somewhere. No, I did that already. This is a 3-hour video. Alright, let's look at his other video. Is this it? Yep. Loading. Oh, what happened? It's not loading. Is it loading? Okay, I'm gonna go off my let it load again.
Greetings, Guardians. My name is Bife here. So today we're doing a big summary video for those of you who've been away since ShadowKeep. How big, you ask? Well, not as big as previous summary videos. Before we start though, some super quick things. Firstly, thank you for 800,000 subscribers. That's crazy. Really exciting to see the channel and the community around it grow. Secondly, if you want to catch up on the lore before ShadowKeep, you may want to watch my complete catch-up of all of Destiny's story, which has literally everything. I mean everything. This thing is 4 hours long. And when you're done with it, you should have a pretty good grasp on everything up until the ShadowKeep expansion, which I'm going to go over now, as well as the last 2 seasons. Thirdly, I'm taking part in the GCX Charity Marathon on Tuesday at midday Eastern Standard Time, and I'd love it if you guys could be there to support the kids of St. Jude that come from that season that you might have otherwise missed. So with all that said, let's start with ShadowKeep and Season of the Undying. The first thing you need to know is that Eris Morn has been away since the Red War. Her objective was effectively to prepare for the arrival of the darkness, knowing that one day it would make its way back to our system again. This led Eris to a whole bunch of places, some of which led to Savathûn-flavored shenanigans, but eventually she found her way back to the moon, where she discovered a darkness pyramid beneath the old lunar surface. The Hive of the Moon were equally in disarray ever since the end of the Dark Below, and their storyline converged with Eris, but not before some of their own shenanigans. This of course all took place after we had killed Crota and left them effectively leaderless. For a long time the Hive had been trying to replace Crota, and they had been doing so by use of ritualistic slaughter in their pits, which allowed lesser Hive to battle to the death until a champion emerged. The story of Inquisition of the Damned takes place here and effectively sees the Hive on the moon in turmoil, with the Daughters of Crota just barely holding on to power by the end of the story, and even at the start it seems. In the process of all this, Hashladun, Crota's eldest daughter, hears the whispers of Savathûn, Oryx's sister, or one of Oryx's sisters. For those of you who don't know, Savathûn is one of the original 3 Hive who ascended to godhood when they made their pacts with the worm gods. This is very old Hive lore, but it's worth knowing because Savathûn is a major character going forward. The whispers of Savathûn basically instructed Hashladun to create the Scarlet Keep and to prepare for the light-bearing guardians that would soon be coming back to the moon. It's at this point that ShadowKeep starts, when the Scarlet Keep has been built, and when the Hive are frenzied by the awakening of the pyramid itself. Guardian forces notice this as a mysterious disturbance, and they descend upon the Ocean of Storms in what can be best described as a full-scale invasion, with air support and heavy armor in tow. All this allows us to push into the keep, where we find Eris. Before we do find her though, we found a pyramid, and the first enemies that are truly things of darkness, in the form of nightmares. Before a nightmare of Crota, of Gaul, and of the Fanatic could kill us, Eris Morn pulled us out and saved us, telling us that we would need to find a way inside the pyramid to try and understand as much as we could and defeat the coming darkness. In order to do this, we would need to get past the pyramid's defenses in the form of a barrier of nightmare energy and the nightmares themselves. This led to the necessity of recovering a Hive cryptoglyph within the deep catacombs of the Hellmouth, and in the process of this, we would kill one of Crota's daughters, Besserith, leaving only 3 out of the 4 daughters alive. This wasn't the only Hive that we put to the slaughter though. We ascended to the top of the Scarlet Keep and slew Hashladun as well, leaving 2 of Crota's 4 daughters remaining alive, Kinox and Voshir. Whilst we fought all over the moon, we also recovered nightmare essences from killing old nightmares of our past, traumas that we had not fully set to rest. The essences of these nightmare enemies allowed us to craft a unique set of armor known as the Dreambane armor, and when completed, this set allowed us to bypass the pyramid's defensive barrier, and were then grabbed by the pyramid and pulled inside directly by the pyramid. In the bowels of the ship, we fought various nightmares, and the darkness took control of our ghost, using it to talk to us and preach the weakness of the light. All of this culminated in a moment where we reached the zenith of the pyramid and found a mysterious statue and an even stranger artifact at the top. Upon retrieving the artifact, we saw a vision of the Black Garden and a shadowy version of ourselves, with a whole fleet of pyramid ships to their back. It approached us and left us with a warning and a message. It told us that it was not our friend and it was not our enemy, but instead, it was our salvation. Whether or not this is true is entirely up for debate, but I'll stick with the Traveler until the shadowy version of myself stops giving me creepy eyes like that. After the campaign came the Garden of Salvation raid, where the artifact we had recovered from the pyramid emitted a strange signal. It had been pinpointed to originate in the Black Garden, and so through a lunar gate, we entered the Black Garden to face what lay there, namely, the Sol Divisive, a group of Vex that worshipped the darkness and were empowered by it. We followed the signal through the Black Garden and defeat a variety of Vex constructs until we reach the plateau of the Black Garden itself. Here, we face the Sanctified Mind and defeat it. When defeating it, a pyramid scale ship appeared, and below it we entered the bowels of the Garden Mesa itself, finding a place where the pyramid signal's origin point could be found. We also found the same kind of statue that we had found on the pyramid ship, and from that moment forward, the artifact that we had recovered began to send us communications directly, going through us and Eris. The communications would become the Unveiling Lawbook, where the darkness would tell us of what was supposedly the beginnings of the universe, as well as its beliefs. And further from this, we would start to understand an idea. The idea that there was a need for the light and dark to exist in balance, and for the first real hint that we might be using the darkness in the future. Our fight against the Vex, however, wasn't quite done. In the tower, we spoke to Ikora, who told us of a Vex mind from the Black Garden that we had previously slain, but was now resurgent. The Undying Mind. A Vex who had control over the Black Garden, and whose secondary directives could lead to the destruction of humanity and the Guardians for good. Ikora entrusted us and the other Guardians to gather Vex components so that a portal could be constructed, which would be capable of pulling the Undying Mind through time and destroying it in every possible timeline in which it had been replicated, thus defeating it for good. We built this portal over an entire season, and eventually, it led to the events that started the Season of Dawn. In the lore for ShadowKeep, we also saw some neat stuff about Pradith and the Ishtar Collective member copies in the Aspect lorebook. We saw how the Darkness used a gravitational superweapon to destroy Titan's arcologies in the Last Days on Kraken Mare lorebook. We uncovered how the Darkness Pyramid had been slumbering in place in the moon's crust ever since the Golden Age, and had even corrupted Golden Age personnel on the moon in both the Collector's Edition journal and the Revelation lorebook. We found a bunch of fragments of dead ghosts and set the nightmares of Eris's old fireteam to rest again, thus helping her confront her past trauma. We forged the Divinity, a fusion rifle powered by a Vex Divinity core, which was also fused with darkness as best we can tell. The weapon's design is even that of darkness, reminiscent of what you can see within the pyramid ships. We also forged the Deathbringer, a rocket launcher which weaponized the Death Singer's song, and we learned about the Kentark III, a fireteam who entered the Black Garden long ago, gained the powers of the darkness, and then mysteriously vanished. It is presumed that they died, but it is not entirely known what their fate is. All that is known is that their ghosts could not be found. We also saw Kinox and Voshir, Crota's final two remaining daughters, and the presumptive leaders of the Hive on the Moon, activate the Altars of Sorrow, with which they sacrificed the nightmares on the moon. These rituals culminated in the resurrection of the Hive champion Zulmak, and, as best we can tell, were an attempt to reach out and commune with the pyramid. For the Hive to resurrect any one of their champions is a heresy to their faith in the power of the sword logic, thus indicating how far the two daughters were willing to go and how dangerous they had become. We then entered the Pit of Heresy and destroyed Zulmak, thus ending the Hive's rituals and preventing their dark communion. In the pit, we also received messages from a stranger who turned out to be Eris's old fireteam member, Omar Gar, who the Hive had tortured and experimented on, thus turning him into an insect. His light, however, still remained, and in his amber casing he was laid into the heavy machine gun that he had used in his life, thus creating a powerful new exotic weapon, Xenophage. This is the last of ShadowKeep's lore, and this leads us cleanly into the Season of Dawn. In the pre-season lore for Season of Dawn, we join Osiris. He had been constantly searching for a way to return his friend, Saint 14, to life. In order to do this, Osiris created the Sundial, a device that allowed him to manipulate time and to walk through its corridors, thus giving him a chance to potentially find Saint 14 at key moments in his life where he might be able to save him. And with all of this, he might potentially be able to bring him back. But in spite of all Osiris's best efforts, he failed, and no matter how hard he tried and how many echoes he threw into the corridors, he could not find a way to save his friend. And so Osiris cloaked the Sundial and returned to the Infinite Forest to start patrolling the simulation engine once more. When he did this, as the final copy of the Undying Mind was destroyed, the Vex of the Infinite Forest realized that a new future was likely, and thus predicted it right before Osiris's eyes. The future involved the Last City, with a pyramid hanging over it in the sky where the Traveler had been. It turns out that we were the ones who set this future in motion, and that our actions were the only ones that would be able to potentially influence its outcome. With all that going on, a new threat had emerged in the form of three Scion sisters, Ozletk, Tazarok, and Nerul. They found Osiris's sundial in spite of his efforts to cloak it, and figured out that they could use it to potentially uncover a future where the Red Legion won the Red War. And so the cabal of the Red Legion descended on Mercury in force and made a desperate effort to claim the sundial's power, sending Cabal into the past and the future so that they could guarantee the Red Legion's success. It is at this point that Osiris and the Vanguard would ask you to intervene, and the Season of Dawn would effectively begin here. After first taking on the Cabal within the Sundial, for the first timeline branch that we had severed, a mysterious temporal anomaly appeared before us. This would be one of the first of the time-lost weapons that we would retrieve from the Sundial. Much like other time-lost weapons, it would need to be stabilized first, but unlike the others, this one would be familiar to us. It was this moment when we recovered Saint 14's shotgun for a second time, the perfect paradox. Previously, we had recovered it from his grave in the Curse of Osiris, and the shotgun was emitting a strange pair of temporal coordinates that we could use to traverse the corridors of time. When we did traverse those two sets of coordinates, we found two key points in Saint 14's life that Osiris had always been unable to access. Here, we could alter his fate. The first of these time-based coordinates was set in the Dark Age, and it was when Saint 14 led an unsuccessful colonization effort on Mercury at the direction of the Speaker. In this mission, we saved him from the Fallen on Mercury, and we showed him a projection of the city as it was to us, a city that Saint had not seen before, but one where it was protected and flourishing, where the Traveler had awoken, and a second Golden Age had begun. This would eventually blossom into a seed of hope in Saint 14's mind, and it would help to fulfill the prophecy first set out 2 years ago in the Perfect Paradox, where we would first gift the weapon to Saint and become his inspiration to fight on for the defense of the people. In the second of these sets of temporal coordinates, we would encounter Saint 14 as he faced off against the Vex mind known as Agioctus, the Martyr Mind. The Vex had been coded specifically to drain Saint 14's light, and previously they had succeeded. Now, however, you were able to weaken it enough for Saint 14 to destroy the particularly devastating Vex construct, and this saved his life and altered his future. A few moments later, as we returned to the Sundial, we were able to open the gateway to the Infinite Forest for Saint 14. Through the manipulation of time and the machinations of the Sundial, we were finally able to bring back Saint 14, one of the greatest legends that the city had ever known, and the greatest Titan who had ever lived. Saint would look to be more than simply a returning prodigal son, though. He would look to create a beacon of hope for the city and for the Guardians, and this would emerge as Saint aided us in the construction of the Empyrean Foundation. As we all came together to donate Fractaline, it rewarded us with many time-lost weapons and pieces of armor. The Empyrean Foundation was eventually completed upon the donation of billions of polarized Fractaline shards, and with that, we took a gift from Osiris, his lantern, and placed it within the Foundations on Mercury, igniting what would be a new lighthouse that would usher in the return of the trials of Osiris. This would come next season, and we would be ready once again to face each other in glorious combat, to prepare for the troubles ahead. Amongst the time-lost relics of our past that we recovered was also the Devil's Ruin, a sidearm from the old battle at Twilight Gap. But this was not the greatest secret yielded by time. We would venture back into the corridors, and we would discover something truly shocking. With enough exploration, and with enough time decoding the signals within the time corridors, we would find our way to a time-lost vault. To a tomb that belonged to us. After unlocking its secrets, we would eventually be able to approach it, and we would hear Saint's ghostly voice giving our eulogy. In the remains of our tomb, we would find one of the crucial parts to the new exotic fusion rifle known as Bastion, a weapon that was apparently one of our weapons of choice in a time of great need. Our tale for this season was coming to a close, as the number of timelines that the Cabal had infiltrated was shrinking. In desperation, the three Scion sisters leading the Red Legion enacted a joining of minds, creating a monstrosity known as Inotam, Oblivion's Triune. They left their fourth, youngest sister, who we learned little about up until that point, to carry on should they fail. Her name was Amtek, and she vowed that day that if any threat harmed her sisters, it should be annihilated so thoroughly that it would be wiped from living memory. But for all their strength, the sisters were unable to prevent the Guardians from wiping them out and claiming victory, wresting the Red Legion from the timelines and preventing the future that they so desired. Amtek's words, however, would not ring hollow, and she would soon enact her attempt at vengeance. Maybe it would not be her last. In the Season of Dawn's lore, we also saw that Aldrin was still alive after having been resurrected as a Guardian a year prior, and was living as a bit of a loner in the Lost City, keeping away from Guardians and not understanding why they saw him with such hatred and disgust. We also got the Constellations lore book, which told us that there were in fact multiple speakers for the Traveler back in the Golden Age. They actually heard the music of the Traveler and could listen to its voice. The book also records the entries of the speaker that we knew in our time and provides fascinating context about his last words and gives us a reason as to why he could actually hear the Traveler, with some interesting technological manipulation. We also got the story behind the Pigeon and the Phoenix lore book, which was an extremely important story for a whole number of reasons. Firstly, it documented the extended tale of Saint 14 and Osiris, but it also gave us insight into moments where Osiris was seeing visions of a point of light amidst a great darkness. These visions had been happening since the early Dark Age, and they are worth remembering. It'll become relevant in a moment or two. But that was it for the Season of Dawn lore, and what followed was the revenge of Amtek, and the beginning of the Season of the Worthy. In the pre-season lore for the Season of the Worthy, we saw a ton of different stories getting developed, related to the Warmind, the Trials of Osiris, Osiris himself, an old exo-warlock of the Iron Lords known as Fellwinter, and many other characters. Anna Bray would return to discover evidence of the Siddhartha Golem program, which was a project used by Rasputin to learn more about humanity. Essentially, it meant that Rasputin had an exo go out into humanity, walk among them, and learn their ways, an exo that was a part of his neural network. Fellwinter's story related directly to this because he was a Siddhartha Golem, although we wouldn't discover that until the Fellwinter's Lie quest later in the season. Fellwinter's lore story talked about a time in the Dark Age when he fought Lord Shaxx as a warlord. The conflict was consensual, and was effectively made so that Fellwinter could buy time for the Iron Lords, and time for Lord Shaxx to be convinced to join with them, or at very least, to not fight for the warlords. To defend the people that were under his charge, Shaxx gave control of his castle fortress to the Iron Lords, but did not join their ranks. He did keep the title of Lord, though, giving us all a little bit of a hint to his warlord past. It's worth noting that this story, of course, took place long ago, and so Shaxx's current title and current position in the city have not suddenly come into question. Saint 14 and Osiris saw a quick moment of action where Saint was tasked with overseeing the Trials of Osiris and the new lighthouse. Osiris himself, however, had a greater moment in the story, where he had a conversation with Rasputin as documented in a cutscene before the Season of the Worthy launched. Osiris was gifted a coordinate set by Rasputin, coordinates that led to an anomaly out in the Kuiper Belt. When there, Osiris recovered a strange metallic seed. A seed that will become very important later. In the Season of the Worthy proper, we saw Amtek and the remainder of the Red Legion plot out their revenge, as she untethered the Almighty from Mercury and the Sun, and began to accelerate it towards the Lost City. She would then have its crew disable its navigation, engine and core systems, making it almost impossible to divert the Almighty's course. Anna Bray and Commander Zavala boarded the Almighty just too late to stop this from happening. Anna then decided to power up Rasputin by creating a whole new series of satellites that Rasputin could use to bring down the colossal space station before it could hit the city. Guardians would assist in the creation and launching of these satellites through the Seraph Tower events. Rasputin would also open up the Seraph bunkers on Earth, Luna, and Io, which would be a sort of hub for his neural processing on each planet. These bunkers would be routinely cleared, and as thanks for this, as well as other actions in service of it, Rasputin would bless us with the weapons and armor of his Golden Age human auxiliary forces, better known as the Seven Seraphs. Alongside these events, we also saw the development of the Trials of Osiris in full, overseen by Saint 14, who would await Guardians at the new lighthouse and reward them appropriately for their efforts. Later in the season, it would become clear that Rasputin was soon going to attempt to destroy the Almighty. The first live event in Destiny's history, known as Sister's Vengeance, would take place in the tower. The event is presumably named after Amtek, who was attempting to obliterate the city as vengeance for the murder of the three Scions back in the Season of Dawn. The Warmind took down the Almighty, and we watched it crash into the mountains near the city. The wreckage of this beastly station and the damage of the fallen debris can still be seen to this day. In the last few weeks, when the Io bunker had been activated by Rasputin, he had shown us why he had been so keen to ally himself with the Guardians. He showed Zavala and us a three-dimensional map of our system, and revealed to us that the darkness was much closer than we had initially suspected. It had reached the outer edges of the system, and it was soon going to arrive at our main planets. In the coming days, we would work together to defeat the oncoming menace, and as the pyramids approached, Rasputin would display their progress on the walls of every bunker, giving us effectively what was a doomsday clock, leading up to their arrival. In the lore for the Season of the Worthy, we saw a few interesting stories develop. In the Trials and Tribulations lore book, we saw the story of how Brother Vance initially created the first version of the Trials of Osiris, and why he did so. This reason is detailed as Vance experimenting with the original lighthouse and listening to the notes of music that it made whenever a Guardian died. Near the conclusion of this book, Brother Vance would also relay a message from Morosov to Osiris, telling him to plant the seed. It is my belief that this seed is what might have grown into the Tree of Silver Wings in the cradle during the Season of Arrivals. The seed may be what we hold now in the Season of Arrivals as our seasonal artifact. We also saw Rasputin tell us the story of Fellwinter, the Iron Lord Warlock. Rasputin had lured Fellwinter and the Iron Lords into a trap with the promise of Siva. He had then used the advanced nanite technology to kill them in the Plague Lands. But Rasputin did not tell us this as a warning. He told us this story with regret, and realized now the error of his ways. As a means potentially of atonement, and as a way of saying that we should honor his past, Fellwinter's lie, the shotgun of the incredibly powerful Iron Lord Warlock Fellwinter, was gifted to us. This weapon is indeed powerful, purely because of the fact that it has indeed killed Guardians and Ghosts before, and still remains effective against Guardians in the Crucible in particular to this day. We also saw the development of the Cabal story, as Emperor Callus's daughter, Keitel the Princess Imperial, began to take steady command of the Red Legion. We learned of this thanks to the lore of the heist to steal the Fourth Horseman from the Vanguard's vaults, and also due to the acquisition of the Heir Apparent. When the Cabal do return to the story, expect Keitel and her father Callus to be in open confrontation, with Keitel being potentially aided by the Scion Amtek, and maybe even others who previously had taken part in the Midnight Coup but were not slain by Callus's shadows. All of this leads us to the Season of Arrivals, where the Pyramid ships have made landfall within the system. They now rest across the system from Mercury to Titan, and they are omens of a dark and terrible future that awaits us. A future of darkness. A future that starts now. Travel to the Cradle on Io. Travel to the Pyramid's first landing place, and you will discover where our story leads us, and what strange actors have taken part in it. But for now, that is where our story ends. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope this was useful. If it was, go ahead and leave a like. I know that there's a lot of you who will be returning to Destiny at this point, and if you are a lapsed player, welcome back. I hope that the game is better now, and I do hope that you're able to know the story and enjoy it. If you're missing any story from before ShadowKeep again, remember that you can watch the 4-hour long catch-up video to learn everything about Destiny's story. And I don't mean just from the games, I mean from the lore and the lore that goes all the way back into Destiny's ancient history. You will have a complete understanding of the universe if you watch that thing. Not a bad use of 4 hours perhaps, if you can find the time. And of course, if you have any thoughts of your own, go ahead and leave them in the comments section down below. If you want more Destiny content going forward, or more content from Warframe or Doom, you can go ahead and hit the subscribe button and the bell next to subscribe to turn on those email notifications. But as per usual, know that your viewership is quite enough for me. And in the meantime, my name is Bife. Rodacia ad Astra. I'll see you Starside.
Alright, so that concludes this video series. How many hours has it been? It's been about almost 4.5 hours. Awesome, thank you for joining us for this adventure, and hope you learned a lot about Destiny 2, and maybe I'll play some tonight, later tonight. Alright, today will be day 7, and I'll see you guys later. Thank you again, bye for now. And thanks for all the new followers as well. Love you all. I'll play some Destiny later. Let's do a countdown. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, bye!